Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Today on OGGO, Scott Moe is supposed to be interviewed, so we'll see how that goes. Well, from my understanding, they're going to talk about the carbon tax, I believe.
To consider items in main estimates 2024-2025. We welcome.
Mr. Chair, point of order, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have been a member of this committee for 5 years now, and I take pride in the work of this committee, and I take particular pride in the fact that this is a committee that has traditionally been collaborative, and we work together to get to the bottom of things and do the work that constituents and residents and Canadians expect of us to do. We've always worked together. We've always worked together. Let me get to my point, please.
You can get to the point of order, please.
And for the last 5 years, every single chair, and there's been multiple chairs chairing this committee, has always sought instruction from committee members whenever an action was to be taken. And that is a bedrock principle of how this committee has conducted itself for 5 years. Point of order, Mr. Chair. Please allow me to continue. This is important.
No, but please get your point of order, please, Mr. Kuzminchuk.
I am. Last week, a meeting was called without consultation and instruction of this committee. This week, we had 2 meetings scheduled without consultation or instruction or consent from this committee. A witness today was invited yesterday. We found out about this witness at 7 p.m. last night. There was no consultation, no instruction from this committee. And tomorrow we found out from Global News that there may be another meeting tomorrow with additional witnesses. And again, no instruction, no consultation. And so I'm asking the chair to explain to this committee, because this is completely out of tradition and the way we've operated in the last 5 years on this committee. This is something that is
Mr. Chair, I've been very patient. I have not heard any section or any valid point of order. I'd
like to ask the chair to explain how this meeting came about. I have a few questions for the chair, how this meeting came about, what efforts were made by the chair to consult with members of this committee and seek instruction. And a further question, why is this meeting being held today on a constituency week? And why is this witness here before us here today? And so this is a point of order. This is outside of the tradition of how this committee has conducted itself over the last 5 years.
I'm going to cut you off there to get
the
an
chair
answer.
to explain his actions.
Sure. Well, first of all, to start, it's not a valid point of order, but I will answer your questions. The premiers, representing over 60% of the population, wrote to the Chair of Finance to address the issue of the increase in the carbon tax. The Liberal chair, maybe under political pressure from his own party, refused to. As the premiers are the highest office holders in their provinces, representing millions and millions of Canadians, I thought we should respect the provinces and invite the premiers to participate in our study of the estimates, which includes the government spending, including the carbon tax. There's lots of examples of other chairs doing such things. It is the privilege and obligation, I think, of the chair to call meetings, and I did so. I'm happy to go through some of the examples of other chairs from government-led parties doing the same, but it is within the prerogative of the chair to call such meetings, and I did. And we're ready to start the meeting.
Mr. Chair, again, point of order. Section 108 of the standing orders clearly states that committee members instruct the chair on any action. And so I ask you again, what instruction, what consultation, even basic consultation, did the chair undertake to schedule this week's meetings, including the meeting that, again, we hear is going to be scheduled for tomorrow, and to seek again, instruction from this committee? I think it's really important because this is a departure. Folks that are listening, I want them to know that this is a departure from the way we've conducted business at OGGO committee for 5 years. This is new.
Yeah, it is within the powers and the prerogatives of the chair to call meetings, Mr. Kuzmierczuk. Our clerk is looking at the exact quote ruling, if you wish, but it is fully within the powers of the chair. For example, the Liberal chair of Natural Resources called a meeting without anyone's knowledge in order to ram through the anti-Alberta, anti-energy industry
Point of order.
C-250. So it has been done in the past. And yeah, please let me finish, Ms. Outland. It is fully within the powers of the chair to call such meetings, and I have. Go ahead, Ms. Outland.
Mr. Chair, I think you're taking a little bit of liberty there, insinuating that there's some sort of Liberal government with pushing our Liberal chair in another committee not to have these meetings. I'm certainly they're respecting the time and commitments of their committee members.
That's not a point of order, Ms. Outland.
I'm getting there, actually, Mr. Chair.
Well,
I would actually like to highlight your own bias in making this decision. I'm noticing the stickers that have always been present as props in this committee. You love pipelines and oil and gas, and it's very clear. And so perhaps that had a stake in this decision that you've made today.
Mr. Chair, that's not a valid point of order.
It's not a valid point of order. I do. So let me finish. Yeah. I do love oil and gas. If it bothers you, I will close my laptop. Mr. Drouin and Mr. Lawrence, and then we're going to start the meeting.
So I'm not a regular member of this committee, but I've been a member of this committee for 6 years. Never would Tom Lukiski, a good Saskatchewan MP, have done this. Never in his lifetime would he have done this.
That's not a point of order.
And the precedent that you are setting, Mr. Chair, is that I can tell you your side will be pissed off with us because we'll call meetings at our disposal, and your side will not be happy with us.
That is the chair's
If that's the way you want to set the precedents of this committee, I'm telling you, we're going to challenge you.
Okay. That is the chair's prerogative to call a meeting if he wishes. If another committee wishes to do
Mr. Chair,
so,
if you're saying that no motions and no instructions from the chair must be undertaken from now on, that is false. That is simply false.
I'm going to read to you, and for Mr. Kuzmierczuk as well. Committee chairs have considerable administrative responsibilities, starting with those involving the committee's program of activities and compliance with instructions from the committee or an order from the House. The chair calls committee meetings. So,
well, Mr. Chair, point of order, and I believe exactly. I think you said it right there, and it bears repeating. It bears repeating. In compliance with instructions from the committee. In compliance with instructions from the committee. In compliance with instructions from the committee.
Yeah, let me
Mr. Chair,
just
you have
address,
neither sought. You
let
have
me
neither
interrupt
sought
you on that, Mr.
nor
Kuzmierczuk.
consultation from this committee.
Mr. Kuzmierczuk, let me address that.
And you have acted unilaterally You have acted unilaterally outside the will of this committee. That is the issue that I have with you, sir. If you want to schedule meetings with witnesses, work with committee members. That's the way we've always done it. Past chairs have always respected that principle.
Please let me address your point of order.
That is the issue that I have with you today.
If I could respond, I will address that. We are meeting on the estimates, the 2024-25 estimates, which the committee has agreed to. That is what our meeting is on today, and that is what I noted when I did my opening statement. Under Standing Order 81 for the committee is meeting to commence the consideration of the main estimates 2025.
And why did you schedule this meeting today on a constituency week? May I ask, Mr. Chair, so that folks watching can know this?
This is going to be the
study on the main estimates. When is it due, Mr. Chair? When is the study, the committee study on the estimates due?
We are meeting on the estimates. I have the prerogative to call a meeting on the estimates that the committee agreed to. We are now going to turn.
When is it due, sir?
That is beside the point, Mr. Kusmirchuk.
May 31st.
That's nice.
May 31st.
That's fine.
We're
now going to turn things over to
Mr. Chair, point of order. I just want to clarify to this committee, you've mentioned main estimates, and I'll remind that this committee is responsible for Vote 1 under Canada Post Corporation, Vote 1 under Canada School of Public Service, Vote 1 under Canadian Intergovernmental Conference Secretariat. So I'm hoping that Premier Moe will be able to answer questions about Canada Post Corporations. I'm not sure he will be, because that's not his responsibility. So again, we're asking for...
I will quote once, and then we're going to get to...
With the consent of committee. You did not get the consent of committee.
Mr. Moe, in the main estimates, CRA, distribution of fuel charges.
This committee is not responsible for CRA.
$6.8 billion going to 9.5, but it's the part of the main estimates, and we are studying the main estimates.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I've been a long-time member of this committee before my appearance here. I understand what this committee is responsible, and you're misleading committee.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
CRA goes to finance, and you know damn well that's where it goes.
Okay.
You've been very...
First of all, refrain from the language, Mr. Drouin.
Pardon my French.
Mr. Chair, you've been very patient, and I could recite numerous times that Peter Fonseca, Chair of the Finance, has adjourned and called without instructions. I could rattle them off, Francis. So this is ridiculous. Let's move on. We've got the Premier Moe. I know that you guys don't want to talk about the carbon tax and you don't want to hear from the people of Saskatchewan, but Canadians do.
Thanks, our Premier Moe. We're going to turn things.
Mr. Chair, I have a point of order. And this is going to be my last point of order, but it needs to be made. You called a meeting unilaterally without instruction or consultation with the members of this committee. That is a fundamental bedrock principle. And furthermore, you called this meeting on the mains. The deadline to study this is May 31st. There is no reason to call this meeting during a constituency week when we literally have 2.5 months to study the mains. This is a political stunt and theater, which is part and parcel of where our conservative colleagues are taking this to get clips.
Can you get to your point of order, please? Speaking
of getting clips. That is my point, sir. You unilaterally called a meeting that was not necessary this week because your team is after clips.
Okay.
And again, I take issue and umbrage with that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but it's not a valid point of order. Ms. Vignola, then hopefully we can get to our honorable guests. Ms. Vignola, go ahead, please.
I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I simply wanted to add to the facts in this matter. According to the standing orders, meetings must be called 48 hours in advance. And members of the committee must be informed, or at the very least, consulted in the choice of witnesses, which is not the case, and which has not been the case for some time. And contrary to what my colleague to my right would dare to claim, well, that I'm not interested in hearing from about Saskatchewans. Well, it actually is important for me to see all perspectives. Even in Quebec, the carbon tax doesn't apply, and yet it's important to hear from all stakeholders, all perspectives. Now, that said, I would like now to denounce the methods that are being used in going about this. Had we been informed, we probably would have given our consent. Let's hear from these witnesses. However, we were not informed, we were not consulted, and as Deputy Chair of this committee, I find this to be a great pity, not only in terms of my own preparation and my own research in preparation for a meeting, but also, of course, it's important to give witnesses the time and to ask questions of them that have to do with the matters that we are currently studying, regardless of whether it's the estimates or another issue or matter. Now, not only is there a requirement for 48 hours notice when there's a request made to hold a meeting, but during a non-sitting week. This is a constituency week, which are invaluable to all of us, for all of us. And, you know, perhaps you're only thinking of the next election, but I think of my constituents in Premier Moe that want to see me, that want to meet with me, that want to talk to me about the situations that they're facing when it comes to employment insurance, seniors, retirement benefits, immigration issues. I have a huge number of people that are knocking on my door seeking my support, and that's just not possible in this instance. Now, obviously, during a non-sitting week, committees should take place, meetings should take place during the same time slots as during sitting weeks. And that is not the case in the case of yesterday and tomorrow. You know, we learned in the global news that there'll also be a meeting tomorrow, even though we received that notice of meeting at 9:45 this morning. And I am deeply troubled. There should be greater respect displayed to each other. Respect for our work, for our duties. Mr. Chairperson, on a point of order.
Moi, j'ai beaucoup de respect.
I have a lot of respect for the member. However, this is not a point of order.
Mr. Lawrence is right. If you could get to your point of order, Mrs. Vignola.
Mais écoutez, je faisais référence au règlement de la Chambre des...
Well, listen, I was referring to the House of Commons Standing Orders, 20th of June 2024, regarding notice required. And if this is not a point of order that I'm raising, what is it? That speaks to a problem here. If I'm not just talking about anything willy-nilly.
Specifically, sorry.
Fait que c'est quand même assez clair.
Well, I thought it was quite clear what I was saying. I'm referring to the standing orders. This isn't coming out of nowhere.
I've had one answer, but we're double-checking. If you want, or if you wish, bear with me, we'll suspend for a couple seconds and we'll just reconfirm. We are suspended for a couple moments.
Wow, this is going to be quite the meeting. Anyone that's new to the channel, please like and subscribe to help support the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell notification so that you can be notified right away whenever I become live or release a new video. Anyone that's who would like to can help support the channel by purchasing a super chat or sticker or becoming a member even.
48 hours is for election of the chair, and then there's a different time period for 106.4s, but not specifically to call a meeting. So, well, I appreciate your comments. We are going to proceed. Premier Moe, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, point of order
I've
here.
turned it over to Mr. Moe, our Premier Moe. Could you?
This is about, Mr. Chair, this is about Standing Order 108, which you have not addressed here, that states, and again, I want you to address it to this committee, that states, in compliance with instructions from the committee or an order from the House, the chair calls committee meetings, decides on the agenda.
Mr.
You have done none of those things. You have done none of those things. And it is a shame and a farce, as Madame Vignal has
stated. Get your clip in, Mr. Kuzmierczak, and then I will address this.
That we have learned about tomorrow's meeting from global news as opposed from our chair. That is a farce. That is a farce. And it's a violation of the bedrock principles of the way that this committee has conducted its work over the last 5 years. That is shameful. It is shameful and disrespectful to the work of this committee. And as Madame Vignal has stated, we want to be able to prepare for our witnesses. We want to be able to have due preparation so that we can do the work that Canadians expect us to do. We have neither been provided any opportunity to consult. We've been provided no opportunity to provide instruction, and we have not been provided opportunity to prepare for this day. And that is on the chair. And you have not responded to Standing Order 108.
I have responded to that, Mr. Kuzmierczak. It is, the committee has instructed me to hold meetings on the estimates, and that's what this meeting is on the main estimates. So I have ruled on that. We're now going to turn things over to Premier Moe for a 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I trust you can hear me all right. But I do appreciate the very warm Canadian welcome to your committee here this morning. I believe it likely started with a request by myself and a number of other premiers to appear before the Finance Committee, and I believe that request still stands, and we hope to hear back from them. And I think this is an important conversation for each of us as elected members, as next Monday we are going to see the carbon tax increase to a level that was previously never committed to achieve. When at its introduction, and I think that's important for us to just think about the words that we should never say never in this nation. Never say never. And I was at that meeting many years ago in Montreal, where there was a commitment made to go to a $50 carbon tax, and since then what we've seen is commitments to go much higher than that. But I would point more recently to July 15th in 2020 to some statements made by our Bank of Canada governor, and I quote, "Our message to Canadians is that interest rates are very low and they're going to be there for a long time." He goes on to say, if you've got a mortgage or you're considering making a major purchase, or you're a business and considering making an investment, you can be confident that rates will be low for a long time. Again, I would say never, because so much has happened since that point in time, July 15th, 2020. What that did is really provide a confirmation bias for some poor policy decision and enhancing or advancing continued poor policy decision, taking the carbon tax from 50 to a committed 170 now and beyond. Of which we will discuss here today, and our ask is to pause the increase that is coming on Monday, but also the development of clean electricity standards, clean fuel standards, which is really a second carbon tax, the methane 75 standards, which are unachievable, the oil cap.
Mr. Chair, a point of order. I don't mean to interrupt the Honourable Premier, but I do have a point of order here.
You are interrupting, though.
Mr. Kuzmierczak, the Premier just has a couple minutes left. Could we let him finish, and then he can...
I am, but what I would like to, excuse me, Premier, I have a point of order.
Sorry, Premier, let me interrupt you. I'll choose the time.
I'd like to speak on behalf of the Saskatchewan residents.
Thank you, Premier, and we're eager to hear from you. I just have a point of order that I'd like the Chair to clarify. We have been asked to study, specifically, this committee has been asked to study about 12 vote ones, okay? Including the Canada Post Corporation, vote regarding the Canada School of Public Service. Could you get to the point of order, Mr. Kuzmierczak? Could you explain to us the relevance of the 12 votes that we have been assigned to consider? Because I don't see this particular subject matter connected in any way, shape, or form to the 12 votes that this committee has been asked to study. We are not the Finance Committee. We are the OGGO Committee. We have been asked to study 12 votes. I'm happy to answer that, Mr. Kuzmierczak. How does that relate to what we've been asked to study. Thank you. I appreciate that.
We always allowed a very wide range of questioning on the estimates and the supplementary estimates. The carbon tax raise is included in the main estimates, and therefore that's part of it. So I'll allow our Premier Moe to continue.
And very much, I think, important to Canadians, as this is one of the policies, and they are stacking, that is making life more unaffordable for not only Saskatchewan residents, but all Canadians as a whole. It's making industries less competitive. Those are industries that employ people in my community and quite likely in yours as well. And it is really showing no measurable impact when it comes to reducing emissions. And I would just point to the inflationary aspect of the carbon tax specifically today. And that was when the latest consumer price index came out. Saskatchewan today is at 1.7%, down under the 2% projected target that the Bank of Canada had hit, 1 full point lower than the Canadian average. And Statistics Canada had said specifically that was due to a decision that the Saskatchewan government made to remove the carbon tax from home heating. And so you can imagine what would happen to our CPI nationwide if we were to pause, first of all, and then remove the consumer carbon tax on Canadians. And I would say, where does this bring us today when we think about never saying never? Today, that same Bank of Canada over the last 2 years has increased our interest rates on 10 different occasions. Just this week, they have declared that Canada is in a productivity emergency. And I would say that we don't need to accept this moving forward. We can make changes. Never say never. There is another way, and Saskatchewan has been working towards that way for some time. The Bank of Canada had also indicated that there needs to be investment brought into our nation. We're second in the nation when we compare on per capita provincial investment today. We're up 25% last year, projected to be first this coming year with another 14% increase. And we need to, I think, all Canadians encourage just that investment, that competitive investment environment in each of our provinces and more broadly across the nation. There are opportunities for us then to take that investment in innovation and share it through commerce with the rest of the world, share it through Article 6 of the Paris Accord, for example, which this government signed and of which I worked on as environment minister with one of the previous environment ministers. Article 6, I think, is an opportunity for us to create policies that allow for that investment, and then in turn share those investment innovations with the rest of the world through commerce by employing Canadians in my community and yours, and utilizing some of the tools that we have, such as Article 6. And so there is another way. Never say never. And we need to ensure that we are looking at some of our competitive environment, those that are employing and creating wealth in our communities across this nation, to ensure that we're providing that platform to attract that capital investment, to attract those jobs, and ultimately to provide that opportunity for Canada to not be in a state where we're in a productivity emergency, but are in a state where we are leading the world with the productivity that we are experiencing as Canadians. That's traditionally, I think, what we all would like to achieve. And I hope that we would find some consensus on that today. And again, I wore my red tie in the spirit of collaboration. I wear it to our Council of Federation meetings where we come together as you know, from different political backgrounds and different political stripes. But we come together with an effort and an initiative to, you know, find a consensus on behalf of the Canadians that we collectively represent at that table. And I would say that this is an opportunity for all of us, those that are in the minority government that we have today and in opposition, to do what is in the best interest of Canadians, not just for today, but into the future as well, when it comes to creating jobs and sharing some of the sustainable innovations that have been invested on already in our nation, and enhancing the opportunity for additional investment into just those innovations in the industries that we do well. Because the fact of the matter is this, and this is from a Saskatchewan perspective: we produce food, fuel, and fertilizer, and we produce not only the highest quality, most affordable food, fuel, and fertilizer that you can find in the world, and we produce it for over 150 countries around the world. We produce the most sustainable food, fuel, and fertilizer that you can find on Earth. And I think that's something for each of us to remember: is never say never. We can always do better, and we should be making every effort to do that around this table on behalf of the folks that we represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier Moe. Mr. Reddekopp, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Premier Moe, it's great to have another common sense conservative voice in Ottawa, Saskatchewan voice, in Ottawa, to talk about the carbon tax. It's very clear that the Liberals are nervous about this meeting and that they don't really want to hear from Saskatchewan people, but I do. So, as you know, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has produced a report that confirms this year alone, the average family in Saskatchewan is going to lose $525 to the carbon tax. And the NDP Liberal Costly Coalition plans to quadruple the carbon tax, meaning that families in Saskatchewan will ultimately see their losses increasing to $1,723 a year, according to the same report. So the NDP Liberal Coalition will be ripping out thousands of dollars from the pockets of people in Saskatchewan. What's the impact of the carbon tax on families living in our province? Oh, you're muted, Mr.
My apologies. That's the annual impact directly to Saskatchewan families, taking into account, what they are paying for the carbon tax, some of the indirect costs that are coming to them due to the carbon tax, a cost, for example, at the grocery store. But what we have in this province as well is we're very much a natural resource-based economy here. Rooted in agriculture, and we're trying to climb that economic value chain. We're trying to climb with respect to the jobs that we're creating, the opportunities and the market access that we're creating. For example, we're attracting investment into the canola oil industry so that we can provide canola oil as opposed to the raw seed. That's climbing that value chain. It's creating jobs here at home, and where the carbon tax comes in addition to the direct impact to Saskatchewan families that I would put forward, drive more just because we are more geographically dispersed, in particular those families in the north. But it also comes into a significant impact in the jobs that are available here because industries are looking with, this is a hindrance for their investment. We have been able to attract significant investment in spite, I would say, of this hindrance, not in any way because of it. However, that's not to say that we aren't having active discussions with the industry and the people of Saskatchewan on how we continue to reduce our carbon footprint here. And so the impact is very real to families directly. It's very real, I would say, in particular to northern families where they traditionally have been heating their homes with electricity. They are seeing some solace and savings in that with the recent decision that the provincial government has made here. And we, again, extend to the federal government the opportunity to extend their decision around home heating fuel to all Canadians and all types of heating fuel. But they are having some reprieve on that as we speak. But I would say they still have to drive a significant distance for any significant level of supplies. And so families very much are feeling it directly. They're also feeling it through the job prospects and opportunities, of which I'd say are strong in Saskatchewan, but certainly could be even stronger.
So you've been a strong opponent of the carbon tax since you took office. Your predecessor, Brad Wall, was as well. You've had the opportunity to speak with the Prime Minister, launch legal challenges, et cetera. How many different appeals have you made to Ottawa to stop the carbon tax?
All of them. On every occasion that I've had the opportunity to speak with the Prime Minister, whether it be most recently, we had a significant presence at COP28 in Dubai. Saskatchewan did. We had over 60 provincial and national businesses, delegation, industry representatives, post-secondary folks that were with us there. I had the opportunity to speak with a couple of ministers, including the Minister of Environment in that setting. Each and every time through multiple ministers and the Prime Minister himself, we have voiced our opposition to this, what is essentially amounts to an inflationary tax. My predecessor at the very early days of its introduction, and I remember it well because I was Environment Minister at the time, I was in Montreal when the Prime Minister raised to his feet and introduced this tax on Canadians. I believe it was October the 3rd, 2016, if I'm not mistaken. But my predecessor, Brad Wall, had very quickly asked for, has anyone done the economic analysis on this? And I think what we're seeing today with the Bank of Canada's statement, Bank of Canada Governor's statement, or the Bank of Canada's statement around the productivity emergency that we are facing in this nation tells us that, no, we haven't done an economic analysis on this policy and many others, but it's high time we should. And I'm not in any way saying that we should be making decisions that are increasing the emissions in our industries, but we should be looking at what are the emissions in our industries relative to their counterparts and competitors in other areas of the world. Are we cleaner? And can we do more? And in the meantime, we should ensure that we are making every effort to make our cleaner products available to the world, displacing some of those dirtier products that are produced in other areas. And I think if you accept the fact that climate change is real, if you accept the fact that climate change is a global challenge, not just one in Saskatchewan or even Canada for that matter, we need to work together with our national partners on achieving global solutions.
So as you know, the federal NDP has been a strong supporter of the carbon tax, and they voted to support this Liberal government every time, including a couple of times last week. As Premier, how do you feel about an NDP party that supports this hurtful carbon tax and is seemingly against our farmers, against our oil and gas producers, and just not willing to listen to the pain of everyday folks in Saskatchewan?
It's disappointing because we have a provincial arm of that NDP party here that opposes Saskatchewan's wishes to remove the carbon tax, the consumer carbon tax off of Saskatchewan families, and ultimately the cost that it instills on the industries that are employing those very same families. When it comes to oil and gas, for example, and I'm happy to say that if the rest of the world produced oil and gas like we do here in Saskatchewan, the similar type products, global emissions from oil production would drop 25% overnight. That hasn't come about easily. That has come about by investment in the Saskatchewan energy industry, investment in methane reductions. And so the 60% methane reductions that were put forward a couple of years ago, our oil industry was actually able to meet them. They cannot get to the 75%. That will close down significant
Premier
parts
Moe.
of the oil industry.
I have to cut you off there. Thanks.
Sure.
Mr. Kuzmierczak, please go ahead, sir.
I believe it's Charles.
Mr. Sousa, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Premier, for being here today. Can you advise this committee, when were you contacted to appear before us today? You're on mute, sir.
My apologies. We have moved away from most of the online stuff, but I do appreciate the opportunity. I don't know if I was contacted or if I had had a discussion with another premier or two about our request was actually to appear before the Finance Committee. We've not heard back from the Finance Committee at this point in time. So I guess I was contacted. I can't say exactly when. I can find out, though.
Did you have discussions last week about this?
This past week. What day is today?
Okay, that's fine, Mr. Spider.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that the people of Saskatchewan, the tremendous work they do is greatly appreciated. All of Canada has to stand united in terms of improving our economy, supporting trade, initiating competitiveness, and fighting climate, and ensuring that we lower overall emissions to support a green economy. And I think you've said that in so many words. And you've reaffirmed that it's important for us to stand united. And of course, the federal government has also invested $100 million or so in the Potage mine, and we recognize the importance of regional economic growth for the benefit of all of Canada. Premier, you applauded the Supreme Court of Canada's finding in the Federal Impact Assessment Act. You recognize the jurisprudence of the Supreme Court of Canada?
Most certainly we do.
And you encourage Saskatchewan residents to also abide by the laws you put in forth, like the sales tax that you've increased, the fees that you've imposed. You want your residents to pay their taxes. You don't want them breaking the law. Is that correct?
100%. We have a sales tax 3% lower than where it was under the New Democrats, yes.
And so we want to make certain that everyone abides by the law. You're a man of law and you're a man of order. The Supreme Court also found that the federal pollution pricing system is constitutional. And I know you're disputing it and you're going forward, and that's appropriate. But do you recognize the top court of this country when they make their decisions, sir?
Certainly, and we expect these decisions to end up in a similar court at some point in time.
You've already stated that you do want to lower emissions, correct? You want to see Canada and Saskatchewan. You're the former Minister of Environment. You see the benefit?
I would say Saskatchewan's already participating in the lowering of our emissions.
And there probably is a pricing system, a carbon trade within some of your major polluters now. I know in Ontario, we instituted a cap and trade back in 2017, 16, when I was Minister of Finance, to try to find a pricing system to exempt Ontario from the alternative, which is the federal program, which they're encouraging us to do to initiate and support the green economy and enable us to be competitive and abide by international laws, because, of course, our farmers and others are competing out there. We want them to do well. Did Saskatchewan ever consider an alternative system?
Yes, we did. All of them were costly to our industry, as is the federal backstop that we're experiencing now, as well as costly to Saskatchewan families.
And so you're of the opinion, never say never, but it sounds like kick the can down the road for next generation to deal with. What we need is to take initiative and ensure that we are prepared to do what's necessary for future generations and ensure that we're competitive, right?
Yeah, quite proud of what Saskatchewan's doing. I mentioned the oil industry and what they have already done through investments in that industry. But, our ag industry, our Global Institute for Food Security just did a study on comparing, for example, wheat and canola production and the amount of carbon ton of Saskatchewan wheat and canola relative to the next 7 largest producers around the world. 64% lower carbon content in a Saskatchewan ton of wheat and canola than the next 7 producers. When it comes to field peas, that's 92% lower. So I would say, with all due respect, Saskatchewan industries are most certainly doing their part, and we're going to continue to.
And I applaud the efforts that the people of Saskatchewan are taking to move forward.
We appreciate that.
Sir, before I go on to my next point,
sure.
Can you provide this committee with some documents as to how you came to be here, like your schedule and who it was that was contacting you and when it was contacted in order for you to appear today? Can you do that?
If the committee feels that's of relevance.
It is.
What I would ask also is maybe this committee would encourage the chair of the finance committee to allow the premiers that's the original request to present at that committee as well. And
by all
I
means,
think it's important.
Provide both. That'd be great. Chair, I'd like to move forward a notice of motion at this point, and I'll have it translated into French, and it reads as follows: that when the committee undertakes to invite witnesses, that a witness list submission deadline be set by the chair with explicit consent of the committee. B, witnesses be invited proportionally to each recognized party standing in the House. And C, no such witnesses be invited without instructions of the committee. This is, I'm moving this motion forward.
Point of order. I want to clarify if the member was moving motion or actually giving notice.
I'm moving I'm moving the motion. I'm sorry.
Point of order.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Phillips.
I don't believe that motion is in order.
All right, just excuse me 2 seconds. Thanks, Mr. Sousa. So I assume that you're moving it as a matter of hand motion, which I don't believe it's a matter of hand, so I'm not going to rule it in order, Mr. Sousa.
Mr. Chair, I would like to challenge that. I mean, right now, there's been methods
That's fine.
made.
If you wish to challenge the chair,
I do wish to challenge it and move forward the motion and explain why. I mean, there's been instances that we've already noted this earlier before the meeting that unilateral decisions are being made, decisions to move meetings and witnesses without notice to us. It's impacting on members' privilege. It's also disrespecting some of our members. It's a violation of our. So,
Mr. Sousa, I'm going to interrupt. We will go right to the. Yeah, we'll go right to it. I'm advised by the clerk it's treated similar to a dilatory, so there's not a chance to speak on it. But we will go right to the vote on it, Mr. Sousa. Mr. Clerk.
Shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Ms. Atwin.
No.
Mr. McKinnon.
No.
Monsieur Drouin.
No.
Mr. Kumarczyk.
No.
Mr. Sousa.
No.
Mr. Chambers.
Sustain.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes, sustain.
Ms. Crump-Newman.
Yes.
Madame Vignola.
No.
Monsieur Boulris.
No.
3 yeas, 7 nays.
Okay. So the motion, I don't believe it's valid, but we will debate it. Just give me 2 seconds, so I need to check something else with the chair. So bear with me 1 second, Mr. Sousa. Mr. Souza, are you sending in both languages?
Oh, yeah. I got it.
Yes, we are.
Colleagues, there is a procedural thing with this that we have to go over with the analysts and the chair, so I'm going to suspend for a few minutes while we take a look at this. Just bear with us a couple minutes. Premier Moe, I apologize. Bear with us a couple moments.
Hey everybody, anyone new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Share this on social media so that it gets out there on your Twitter, on your Facebook, and anyone who's feeling really generous can help support the channel by purchasing a super chat or a sticker. So thank you for that in advance. As we can see here, Liberals are clearly trying to shut this down as quick as possible because they know that Moe is going to have nothing good to say about the carbon tax, and he's going to show he's going to bring up real points that Canadians are trying to voice themselves. Like it's crazy how hard they're trying to shut this down. Like, what would be a waste of taxpayers' money is if they decided to just take off. If they were like, nope, let's adjourn, and that was it. That's a waste. You might as well just continue the meeting with him in it. Memberships are available for anyone that would like to become a member.
We'll go ahead. Mr. Souza, the floor is yours, or are you fine with that as it's presented? I think it has or is going out very shortly in both languages. Are we ready just to move to a vote on it, colleagues? Do we need to vote on it? I'm sensing, I see nodding heads all around.
On division?
On division?
I request a recorded division.
Sure.
Ms. Atwin.
In favor.
Mr. McKinnon.
Yes.
Monsieur Drouin.
En faveur.
Mr. Kaczmarczyk.
Support.
Mr. Sousa. Mr. Sousa.
You're muted, Mr. Sousa.
Yes,
Thanks.
yes. Mr. Chambers.
No.
Mr. Lawrence.
No.
Ms. Grant-Newman.
No.
Madame Vignola.
Oui.
Monsieur, Monsieur Boulris.
En faveur.
7 yeas, 3 nays.
Okay, that passes. We're now on to Mrs. Vignola. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Sousa there.
Monsieur Moe,
Premier Moe, I'd like to thank you nevertheless for being here today. Now, I do have a couple of questions for you, particularly to do with the fact that you find that the current government is too much of a centrist government. Now, coming from Quebec, I kind of agree with you there. Now, when it comes to centralisation, the federal government is trying to encroach on areas of jurisdiction that belong to you and that belong to Quebec, for example, in the area of healthcare, with strings attached or dividing up transfer payments. Now, from my recollection, you had called for a transfer to the tune of 35% of the healthcare services budget. And just like the other premiers, you didn't get that. What would a 35% to healthcare transfer allow you to do, allow you to improve, not only within the framework of your own budget, but in terms of the healthcare services provided to people from your province? Secondly, can the federal government really know what your healthcare needs are in Saskatchewan?
I will answer those in reverse. So the second question of the federal government knowing what the health care, whoever the federal government is, not just this administration, what the needs are in Saskatchewan or British Columbia or the territories or in Atlantic Canada or Quebec or Ontario. At a high level, possibly, but they should always be looking for opportunities to work with the subnational jurisdiction on how they can traditionally fund. Traditionally, our healthcare was funded 50-50. There was tax points that were moved to the province a number of years ago, and that's how the chair of our Council of Federation at that point in time was Premier Legault from Quebec, and we very much were supportive of returning the healthcare funding balance back to the 35-65 that it was always intended to be. What would that mean to Saskatchewan? Well, you know, where we did land with the federal funding was a 2.6% increase, I believe, over the next 5 years. We just released our budget here this past year. It was 10.4% was the lift that we had provided to healthcare. Some of that is actually the change in how we deliver healthcare here in the province. And so a 35% lift would restore the balance. I think what you're seeing happen today is provinces, and you're seeing a number of their budgets come out as we speak. Provinces are making up the difference in many cases. And that's what we are doing here. And that's why I think the very importance of this committee meeting on ensuring that we have a palatable and attractive investment environment, because it's only in our case in Saskatchewan through the strength of our growing economy that we're actually able to make that 10.4% investment in healthcare. A 9% investment in education, again, another provincial area of jurisdiction. And so we have many points of agreement with Premier Legault at our Council of Federation table and beyond. I think Premier Legault intervened, as did 7 other provinces, Quebec and ourselves, pardon me, that intervened on Saskatchewan's behalf in the Supreme Court case when it came to removing the carbon tax, the consumer carbon tax on Canadians. We in turn have collaborated with Premier Legault on advocating and working through our First Minister's table to increase our
Thank you.
provinces.
Merci.
Well, thank you. On that very matter, as far as Quebec is concerned, we don't have a carbon tax. And the impact on the price increases, according to 165 economists across Canada, well, and I don't want to in any way minimize what the residents of Saskatchewan are feeling and experiencing when I say this, but in Quebec, it is the carbon market alongside California, which is the wealthiest state of the United States. In Quebec, the carbon market has put back in the coffers $1.5 billion The Canadian provinces had the opportunity to join Quebec in that carbon exchange that was not only good for the government coffers, but also for businesses, companies and corporations, because it stimulated innovation in those companies. At the end of the day, why did Saskatchewan make a different choice? And if Saskatchewan wants to get rid of the carbon tax, well, what steps will Saskatchewan take in order to reduce the impacts of climate change and to drive down greenhouse gas emissions? You'll recall that the carbon tax is a similar measure to one that was put in place in the past to diminish or reduce oxidous sulfur emissions. And we have 65% fewer emissions of oxidous sulfur, and we'd like that to happen Canada-wide, and in Quebec in particular, thanks to a carbon marketplace. So why didn't you follow suit, i.e. the carbon market or the carbon exchange, which is kind of lucrative in both the middle and short term?
Great, we're out of time. If you could offer as short as answer as you can, please.
This really speaks to the diversity in our nation. What works in one area of the nation may not work ideally in another area of the nation. And I think this is a reason why if you don't have a federal government that isn't working collaboratively with all subnational governments across the nation, you are destined to fail in your policy development. With respect to the carbon tax specifically, we've always said that it's a harmful tax from day one. And we've always also said outside of Quebec, it's been reasonably fairly imposed, as harmful as it is across the nation. What we've seen more recently with the decisions on that impact heating fuel in Atlantic Canada is that, again, outside of Quebec, and now this tax isn't being applied fairly across the nation or imposed fairly across the nation in any way. And that's why we made the decisions that we did when it comes to home heating fuel, for giving the rebating the carbon tax on natural gas and electricity.
Sorry, we're past our time. Mr. Boulerice, welcome to OGGO. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to our guest. I'm very glad to have an opportunity to speak with the Premier of Saskatchewan today, even though I still don't really understand how it turned out that he's appearing before this committee when we're supposed to be turning our attention to other issues, i.e. the estimates. But given that he is here, I'll take this opportunity. Premier Moe, you'll agree with me that climate change is having increasing impacts on communities, many of your communities in Saskatchewan, that over the recent years have experienced substantial forest fires. There's an increasing number over time. It has an impact on public health and on the evacuees that have had to leave their homes. In 2023, your province had thousands of forest fires, which is far above the 150 average. And the surface area that was affected was 10 times bigger than what would normally occur. And the skies were smoke-filled for days on end, and folks had difficulty breathing. Now, Canada is a laggard on the world stage when it comes to our greenhouse gas emissions. Canada did sign the Paris Accord, and I imagine you are aware of the objectives under the Paris Accord. Now, how is it that we shouldn't make the big polluters pay, those that have a real bearing on our climate change? What's your game plan to deal with those big emitters, please?
Well, I would first of all say the average forest fires in Saskatchewan is 300, not 100 or 150. And we had 450 last year, and we experienced some rain that helped us out immensely. Alberta and northwestern British Columbia had a much more challenging year. Yes, climate change does impact weather, which we're experiencing, I think, in fairness, all across the nation and around the world are experiencing to some degree. The Paris Accord, I'm very familiar with the Paris Accord, and in that accord, there are a number of opportunities, I think, for us to provide a platform. Let me back up. I don't agree that Canada is a climate laggard, and I certainly don't agree that Saskatchewan is a climate laggard. I think Saskatchewan and Canada are leaders when it comes to developing industries that are reducing emissions with innovation, and then sharing those around the world. And again, I said through the Paris Accord, there was Article 6, the internationally traded mitigation outcomes option, of which I would hope that this, and I would encourage this federal government to act on and to work collaboratively. For example, with the Saskatchewan agriculture industry, we're selling air drills all around the world. We'd love to be able to recapture some of those carbon credits back to our Canada and back to our nation and to our province, and ultimately to our agricultural industry and our innovators in that industry that are building some of the latest and greatest technology that are sequestering carbon in our soils, ultimately making Saskatchewan agriculture one of the most sustainable producers of food in the world, and marginally very, very close to being net zero today when you compile that with precision agriculture, when you compile that with the Tier 4 engines that Saskatchewan agriculture producers are paying for and utilizing in every piece of equipment they have. So Canada is not a climate laggard. Canada is an innovation leader when it comes to providing innovation to reduce emissions, whether it be from Saskatchewan's perspective, the ag industry, the potash industry, the uranium industry for clean nuclear power, or the oil industry. And so I think we need to look at this.
Premier, I'm sorry. I know that you like to speak. I know you like talking, Premier, but you haven't answered my question. Now, if you look at the figures, Premier, Canada is the second biggest greenhouse gas emitter. It's not me saying this. This is a UN report that has stated this. In 2016 and 2020, on average, we emitted 16 tonnes per inhabitant of greenhouse gas emissions. That's 4 times bigger than the global average. And we are a far cry from meeting the UN's climate objectives. How are you going to make the big polluters pay for what they are responsible for in terms of climate change? You circumvented the question, you waved your magic wand, and you think that with giant vacuum cleaners you're going to be able to sequester greenhouse gas emissions. But what about the people you represent? How are you going to protect them from climate change?
With all due respect, you're bouncing back between gross numbers of carbon emitted and then a per capita measurement, and you're not able to do that with any credibility with the question. The goal is not for for the big climate polluters to pay. The goal is for them to reduce their emissions because they are employing people in your community and my community, with all due respect. Per capita emissions is the wrong metric to use, and I would encourage everyone at this committee and across government to not be using that metric. If you want to use that metric, Saskatchewan is the largest per capita exporter in Canada and one of the largest per capita exporters in the world. And so what we are producing, yes, it is emitting global emissions, but we are providing that food, fuel, and fertilizer, the cleanest food and fuel and fertilizer, to over 150 countries around the world, and we are displacing, in the case of potash fertilizer, for example, it's 50% lower in its carbon emissions per ton produced. We are displacing fertilizer that is being produced by Russia and Belarus today by making more Saskatchewan fertilizer available. Credit to the federal government that invested in the latest fertilizer, the latest potash mine that is being developed here, a $20 billion investment by a global company. And so the goal is not for our employers to pay more. The goal is for them to emit less and to displace higher emitting, like competing industries around the world. That is how we build a strong Canadian economy. That is how we lower global emissions, and that's how we employ Canadians in your community and mine.
Thanks. That is our time. We're now on to the 5 minutes rounds. Mr. Lawrence, please.
Thank you. And thank you, Premier, for coming here. And as a member of the Finance Committee, let me express my extreme disappointment with the chair unwilling to hear the representatives of over 1 million Canadians in the great province of Saskatchewan. I want to focus relatively narrowly, and that's with respect to the inflationary impact of the carbon tax. Tiff Macklin in Finance Committee made it quite clear that actually 0.6% of inflation, which equates to around 20 to 30% of inflation given the rate on a day, is the responsibility of the carbon tax, and that the increase will be responsible for another 0.15%, meaning that over 30% of inflation is a direct result of the carbon tax. Now, we've been unable to validate this until you took the actions that you did, Premier Moe. And I'm wondering, have you seen an impact in a reduction in inflation by Saskatchewan's actions with respect to the non-collection of the carbon tax on home heating?
The Statistics Canada, in their first report, it said, and I quote, in Saskatchewan, the collection of the carbon levy ceased in January 2024, contributing to the province's year-over-year price decline of natural gas. We're seeing it in Manitoba as well, where the province of Manitoba has foregone their fuel tax on the fuel that they sell each and every day. What you're seeing is the CPI is lowering in Manitoba as well. And so my question to this committee would be, if we were to lower, not increase, but to lower or eliminate what will be 17 cents per liter of fuel charged to all Canadians coming this Monday when they fuel their vehicle up to take their children to soccer, or to hockey, or to whatever sport or school that they might be going to. What do you think that would do to our consumer price index across the nation? We'd likely achieve our 2%. We're at 2.7% now. And I think that would be positive, and it would give the Bank of Canada the opportunity, hopefully, to start to lower the interest rate, start to solidify that certainty for investment, both foreign and domestic, into Canadian communities and Canadian industries, which, again, I would allude to are the most sustainable in the world. The Saskatchewan story around the most sustainable food and fuel and fertilizer that we produce and provide to the world is Ontario has a parallel story. Quebec has a parallel story. This is a story that we told when we went to COP28 in Dubai. And this is a story that we would encourage each of you as federal members representing Canadians, all of us collectively representing all Canadians, to share at every opportunity. We are not climate laggards in this nation. We most certainly are innovators and leaders when it comes to addressing the challenges that we might face globally.
Thank you, Premier Moe. So just to summarize, and I'll pass over to my colleague, is that in the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklin, the governor of the Bank of Canada, said that we would see a reduction in inflation. And we've actually seen that in the province of Saskatchewan, as the rate nationally is 2.7, and the current rate in Saskatchewan is 1.7%. So we've had this validated, which, as you said, if the lower inflation means the lower interest rates go, which means we have more investments, which can enhance our productivity, which can make all Canadians more prosperous. I am just shocked that Liberals want to keep Canadians poor. Thank you.
The opportunity we have is to remove the consumer carbon tax on all things for everyone. That would reduce our inflationary effects that we're feeling when we fuel our vehicle up 17 cents a liter there. That same 17 cents a liter is being paid for the truck that is bringing that vehicle to our grocery store, and so and the fellows that are producing it. And we see that in Saskatchewan as well, not with their direct fuel, but with some of the other fuel sources that they're using in transporting that food. So it is a challenge. And I think, as you can tell, I feel there is a much better way for us to work collaboratively, whether that be across party lines or across, subnational jurisdictions in the nation, if that may be, to really provide the Canadian way on leading the global conversation around climate change.
Perfect. Thank you, Premier Moe. Let me begin with pointing out comments that came from a sitting cabinet minister. Minister of Rural Economic of Canada, Goldie Hutchings. She suggests that a discussion that we'll have down the road when we know that this one is working. But I can tell you Atlantic Caucus was vocal with what they've heard from their constituents, and perhaps they need to elect more Liberals in the prairie so that we can have the conversation as well. She directly linked the prospect of carbon tax carve-outs to voting Liberal. How, Premier Moe, has this changed your relationship with Ottawa, and has it given you and your prairie colleagues confidence that Ottawa is acting in good faith when it comes to the carbon tax?
In about 10 seconds, Mr. Moe, or Premier Moe, sorry.
Well, I don't think there are going to be very many more Liberals elected in Saskatchewan anytime soon. The fact of the matter is this is disappointing, but it does stack on a number of disappointing items. Listen, our relationship with the federal government is issues-based and policy-based. We don't agree with this policy, and we don't agree with those statements.
Thank you, Premier Moe. Thank you, Mrs. Cramp-Newman. Mr. Durin, welcome back to OGGO after a lengthy absence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Premier Moe, as my father always taught me, when you point the finger, there's always three fingers pointing right back at you. And I know that you haven't reduced your provincial sales tax or removed the provincial sales tax on heating, but I don't want to get into that, but I know for a fact that hasn't been done. I know that you haven't reduced income taxes. I've looked at year 2023 and year 2024, it's the same. And I know that it's important to talk affordability, but we have to, if you're going to point the finger at us, I think it's important to recognize that you also need to do something. Now, yesterday, the Prime Minister asked you to come up with a credible plan that will respect our Paris Accord. And you've said something today, which I'm shocked, to be frank. You're against the clean fuel regulations. Do you have canola farmers in Saskatchewan?
Yeah, certainly. We have, we'd likely be one of the largest canola producing jurisdictions in the world, and are advancing that into ultimately climbing that value chain with canola oil. And significant investment, I would say, in canola oil manufacturing. The conversation around the carbon tax has been part of that investment challenge, I would say, but we are finding our ways through that.
Are you aware as to why they've made those such investments into Saskatchewan? And do you know why the Canola Growth Council, the Canola Council of Canada, Canola Growers of Canada were all supportive of the clean fuel standards? Do you understand that? Do you know why?
Because potentially they would use some of that oil to reduce the emissions in the gasoline that we are burning or utilizing, that families are burning across Canada. And there is some of that conversation that is happening. However, I think there is a much more collaborative path forward on what will actually be achievable in this space. This is going to cause the cost of gasoline to go up for families. We are in the process as well at looking at, should we be a feedstock of transitioning really a food product to a fuel product for places that are already have the clean fuel standard in place, like California, for example. And so that is an ongoing conversation, not in all states throughout the U.S., but an ongoing conversation in Canada as well.
But in order to develop the local market, that clean fuel standard is the regulation that allows canola farmers to sell more products for fuels. That's an important policy. That's why they've been so supportive of this particular policy. Now, I want to go on to, you said you've participated to COP28. I'm assuming that you're in favor of international trade?
Yeah, absolutely. We trade with over 150 countries each and every year, export to them, provide them with food security and fuel security.
And I'm assuming that you're also aware that many countries across the world, whether it's Europe, the UK hasn't made this recent announcement. You know what a carbon import tariff is?
I am aware of what a carbon import tariff is.
So do you know what the impact, if Canada does not have a price on pollution, how devastating that would be for our farmers in Canada, in Saskatchewan?
I know that we have a federal government that should be engaging proudly on behalf of the industries that are employing not only Saskatchewan residents, which I would remind everyone are Canadians as well, but all Canadians with respect to what we are doing in our industries today. As I said, the Saskatchewan story is not only in Saskatchewan. Every province has a story about what they are doing, how they are reducing their emissions in the industries that are employing people, creating wealth. And I would ask respectfully our federal government and all of those involved to take that story abroad. That's what we did at COP28, and that's what we continue to do through our 10 trade offices, provincial trade offices that we have that work alongside our High Commission offices and our ambassador offices around the world, including one in London and one in Germany representing the European Union.
No, and I certainly support the work that Saskatchewan farmers are doing. I've been to their farms. They are innovators. The University of Saskatchewan is doing some great work in terms of being able to measure that particular output. But I'm afraid that if we don't put a price on pollution, then we are not going to be competitive in our exports market, because eventually what's going to happen is that jurisdictions that do not have a price on pollution will be slapped with an import tariff. I don't see how that could be advantageous to our Canadian farmers.
Yeah, I rival that concern with the federal government making these policy decisions that are going to put our national and I would say our continental food and fuel security at risk. And that is exactly what we saw happen.
And that's why I'm pleading with you to come up with a regional plan that makes sense for Saskatchewan. Absolutely. If you want to exempt farmers, that's up to you. But a regional approach is much better than a federal approach. The Prime Minister asked you to come up with a plan, so I'm pleading with you, come up with a plan that makes sense for Saskatchewan farmers. Thank you.
We did.
Thanks. That is just past our time. Mrs. Vignola, go ahead for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup,
Well, thank you very much again, Mr. Chairperson. Now, earlier you said that the carbon exchange was perhaps not an effective initiative for Saskatchewan. It's just been great for Quebec for the past 25, 30 years. I could tell you about childcare, the anti-scab legislation and a whole host of things. But that said, do you feel that Toronto's trade exchange is bad for Saskatchewan, the New York one, the Toronto one, and I'm trying to establish a link here with the carbon market. In a sense, it works in the same way, and it would make Saskatchewan bring in substantial amounts of money for both Saskatchewan and the federal government without hurting the rest of the economy, as you alluded to in your opening remarks. Are you against stock exchanges? Because stock exchanges do apply to Saskatchewan. Is it only the carbon exchange that you have a problem with and not stock exchanges per se?
No, and we have many companies here that not only I would say trade and are traded on Toronto Stock Exchange, New York Stock Exchange. We have commodities in Chicago, but also globally. Many countries that are investing in Saskatchewan are on global stock exchanges as well, and that is a way for them to access capital. And we all know precisely what stock exchanges do. When it comes to the heavy emitter carbon space, we have a provincial plan in place for that. In fact, in many ways, worked with Alberta and led the nation alongside Alberta with the formation of a technology fund and working with our industries on what's achievable, when it's achievable, and ensuring that they are making the adequate investments to achieve lower emissions over time, ensuring that we are not putting forward unachievable targets.
Merci.
Thank you, Premier. My final question. You don't want a carbon exchange. You don't want a carbon tax. You're making investments to improve technology. But what solutions? We're trying to come up with solutions here. What solutions have you come up with that will enable Saskatchewan to reach its overall emissions targets when it comes to actually cutting back on greenhouse gas emissions?
I apologize. We're past our time. If you're able to offer up a brief response.
Significant solutions in the nuclear space when it comes to our electricity grid, significant solutions in trading through commerce, innovation in our ag industry, which I said is the most sustainable in the world. Same goes for oil, same goes for potash, and the opportunities through internationally traded mitigation outcomes to capitalize on trading carbon credits back and forth globally through that system. And so we have the Provincial Tech Fund. We have a fund set up that our industries can access to invest in reducing their carbon footprint, but I would say that they are doing so anyways on their own, and we continue to set targets with them through our output-based emitter program, provincially put forward that we have here, and they're doing a very good job when we compare them to their global competitors.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boulris, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Premier, you've used arguments that we've heard bandied around in the past, i.e. that when we reduce pollution by unit of production, well, then we compare well with other countries such as Russia and Venezuela. But that's a red herring most of the time, because if we reduce pollution in that way by, say, 15%, and yet there's an increase of over 50% in overall pollution, well, the upshot of that is greenhouse gas emissions are up. And that is contributing to climate change, forest fires that are threatening your own communities. So reducing the density of pollution by unit of pollution doesn't really mean that much. Now, you said that the price on carbon is being borne by consumers and individuals. But what solution would you come up with when it comes to pricing carbon for companies and corporations?
We have that solution in place with our output-based heavy emitter fund. They pay into a tech fund, and they're able to access those dollars for investments in innovation. And like I said, they're going far above accessing just that fund for investments in innovation. They're making their own. I haven't put forward any arguments. I've put forward facts. When it comes to buying something globally, you'll have an ingredients list on the side of your box, and you'll have a price tag on it. I would say put a carbon content piece on that box as well. When you are purchasing oil that might be made in Saskatchewan and on your fuel pump, you should know that since 2015, we've reduced the emissions 65%. That's very real. If the rest of the world did that, global emissions down 25% overnight. If you're producing a granola bar or a wheat product or a canola oil product, 64% lower carbon in a Saskatchewan-based product, Saskatchewan-produced product versus somewhere else in the world. By buying that product, you are making the sustainable decision of buying a lower carbon product. The same is true when you buy potash fertilizer made in Saskatchewan. Not only would I say that it is very arguably more ethical than other places in the world, but it's had half the carbon content per ton. And you are doing right by providing that fertilizer for your farmers. You're doing right because it's cost competitive. It's it's a high grade quality, but it's the most sustainable product that you can buy in the world. And if you truly do care about the environment, you should buy your products from Saskatchewan, and I would say equally, you should buy them from Canada as well, because we are doing the right thing, whether it be in industries, whether it be in families, whether it be in communities. We are making every effort to reduce our footprints, and we're doing it and can do it without a federally imposed carbon tax, I would put forward.
Thank you, Premier Moe. Mr. Barlow, and then Ms. Atwin to finish. Mr. Barlow?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Premier, for being here. First, I want to, say congratulations on the economic output of your agriculture sector in Saskatchewan. I see it exceeded $2 billion in exports again last year. And I just want to put the numbers are quite staggering, as you talked about, in terms of the production from Saskatchewan and the impact it has not only on Saskatchewan economy, but Canada. When Saskatchewan exported 91% of Canada's chickpeas, 88% lentils, 80% of Canada's durum wheat, 67% of Canada's dry peas, and more than 50% of Canadian production of canola, barley, oats, and canola oil comes from Saskatchewan. When you see that kind of output, what impact does Saskatchewan's agriculture sector have not only on Saskatchewan's economy, but Canada's economy?
I just say you said $2 billion in exports. It's $20 billion in ag exports, $50 billion in total exports from Saskatchewan. And to Mr. Bullerese's question earlier, that makes us the highest per capita exporter in the nation. And we are exporting the most sustainable products that you can find on earth. And so the carbon tax does have an impact on each of these industries, a very real impact. And I'd say an impact on the families and people that work in these very industries, as well as we've discussed over the last period of time. But I would say that there's a larger problem looming when it comes to the investment attraction in order for us, and our goal is to continue to expand these industries out, to produce more of the sustainable goods that we produce make those available to the world. We need to attract investment to do that. When you look, for example, at primary agriculture production, and you listed what we produce there, and it's the spinal cord of the Saskatchewan economy. Every community in this province is dependent on it in some way, directly or indirectly. When you look at the fertilizer cap that was being bantered about a while ago, that would reduce our production in this province by 20 to 30%. Why would we reduce production when in a world that needs food security and requires food security and is looking for food security? Why would we reduce the production of the most sustainable food that you can find on earth and not look for ways to enhance that production and make it more available to Canadians, displacing some of the other food that's produced in other areas. Or better yet, take some of the innovation that we have in Saskatchewan, sell it through commerce, utilize our internationally trade mitigation outputs to capture those carbon credits back to Canada, Saskatchewan, and the ag industry so that they can reinvest in even more innovative opportunities to make sure that not only are we doing better when it comes to reducing our carbon footprint in food production, but we're sharing that technology, we're sharing that innovation with the world. We're doing this in India right now. The second last time I was in India, and our exports to India are up in the last while. Second last time in India, I stood on an air drill built in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, in a farmer's field just outside of Chandahar. They had sold 1,000 of those air drills. The latest technology in zero-till air drill technology that you can find on Earth is now being transferred through commerce to India. That's a good thing for the environment, and it's a good thing for the sustainability and food production in India.
Thanks, Premier. And I find this discussion we're having quite incredible when you talk about the environmental sustainability and successes that Saskatchewan farmers have put on, and yet you continue to be punished with carbon taxes and higher carbon taxes rather than being applauded for some of the accomplishments in innovation and precision agriculture in Saskatchewan. We know the numbers. Saskatchewan farmers paid $12 million last year in direct carbon taxes alone. When that carbon tax was up 23% on Monday, Saskatchewan farmers will be paying $15 million in direct carbon taxes to heat and cool their barns, dry their grain. That doesn't include the carbon tax they'll be paying on transportation, another $36 million just on the carbon tax from transporting commodities through rail. Premier, what is the economic impact on the sustainability of your farm families in Saskatchewan if they are continuing to absorb these higher carbon taxes?
Well, it will come home to roost in years where margins are thin. And we had certain areas of the province, as was noted earlier, that did experience drought, not just this year, but last year. We had some areas of the province that had record production. And so I would just say the successes that we're having we feel somewhat unrecognized. And I would say the industry feels they're unrecognized. And so we would ask all federal MPs, our federal government members on all sides to recognize what we're doing, not only in Saskatchewan agriculture and Saskatchewan industries, but recognize what Canadians collaboratively are doing in the various industries across. This cost is not helping. It isn't driving innovation. It most certainly isn't driving the investment environment that we need to ultimately drive that innovation that is going to make our industries more productive. In fact, the Bank of Canada has said just this past week that actually we have a productivity crisis. And I would say that we need to have another look. A very high-level look at how are we going to create that investment environment, because with that investment comes innovation. With that innovation comes industries with Canadians working in them all across this nation, whether it's manufacturing in Ontario or Quebec or natural resource production in the prairie provinces and into British Columbia as well, or all of the good things that happen in Atlantic Canada. We need to attract that investment, drive that innovation, and then look at how we can share that innovation with the world through commerce, yes. And that is ultimately the recipe for success for the manufacturing industry in Ontario and Quebec, is they are selling their cars, vehicles, not only to Canadians, but to other people around the world. And there's some of the latest technology
Premier Moe.
Available.
Thanks, Premier Moe. We're now Ms. Hatwin, please, for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Premier Moe, for being with us today. I'm just going to begin by quoting the Supreme Court of Canada in their ruling around carbon pricing. Climate change is a threat of the highest order to the country, and indeed the world. The undisputed existence of a threat to the future of humanity cannot be ignored. A provincial failure to act directly threatens Canada as a whole. So, Premier Moe, you mentioned that you do believe we need to lower our carbon emissions. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you took part in COP discussions. So do you support the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change?
We supported the work that was done with respect to tripling the nuclear footprint, Canada signing on to that agreement. We think that will go a long ways in reducing global emissions. We did not support the methane 75 announcement that came out at COP28 by our federal Minister of Environment. And those are about the only two discussions that we had alongside.
Is that why you sent a delegation of 60 members?
No, what we did was go to unfortunately tell the story that Canada didn't, and that was exactly what we're doing and how we're producing the products in Saskatchewan. I mentioned potash. I mentioned
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to focus it back on Canada. Sorry to interrupt you, sir.
You asked
I'm
why I
looking
went.
national.
This is why I went. This is why I went. Is we went to tell the Saskatchewan story. We have a
sorry, sir. Yes,
office
thank
in the
you.
Emirates. Yeah.
I need to.
It's a good story. You and I'll sit down and I'll share it with you one day.
Sure. So do you support Canada's commitment to the Paris Agreement then?
Certainly,
Reducing our emissions.
in particular, Article 6, of which we would like to see some activity in Article 6.
And so, again, I'll point to a point that Ms. Vignola made, that just this week, 100 economists signed off in a letter in an attempt to dispel some of the main arguments of Mr. Poilievre and other opponents, including yourself. These economists say that a carbon price is actually the least costly way to lower emissions. So if you agree we need to lower emissions, and we're looking at affordability challenges for Canadians across the country, and this is the least costly way, what would you say to that?
It's not the least costly way in Saskatchewan, and a number of
so
those
you disagree with these economists?
A number of those economists are the very same economists that were appointed by your government to the Eco-Fiscal Commission back in 2016, when
so you disagree with the economists? Yes or no?
The last agreement that all Canadians,
I have
all
such a short
Canadian
period of time.
subnational leaders agreed on was in 2016. It was the Vancouver Declaration. That's the last
thank you.
time
I have to ask another question.
Sure.
So you've also mentioned that you see the carbon levy as showing no measurable impact. So we actually have statistics from the Canadian Climate Institute findings that the carbon pricing system has actually helped lower emissions by about 8% currently, and we're on track to meet our targets. It accounts for about 30% of that emissions reductions plan. And so would you agree with their findings?
I would agree. We could go much further with some collaboration around recognition of the investments in industries from coast to coast to coast in Canada.
I'm also going to focus on the rebate piece because, constituents in my community are certainly concerned about the environment, but they're also, faced with this affordability challenge. And so I'm going to look at some of the folks from your part of the world here. Alan from Saskatoon says the carbon rebate he gets 4 times a year from the federal government is crucial for his household budget. Without the funds, Alan, who is on disability assistance, will have to scale back on spending for his everyday needs. Jermaine from Saskatoon says she relies on the carbon rebate for essentials, and while on disability assistance, the carbon rebate is a key part of her budget. Peter Gilmore, an advocate for the anti-poverty ministry in Regina, says those on low incomes rely on rebates to pay for essentials. Do you know how many people in Saskatchewan rely on these rebates to get by in the midst of an affordability crisis?
In general, they get less back than they pay.
Can you table some data to prove that for us, please,
It's
sir?
in the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report. Been quoted many times, and I can send you that, yes.
So you don't know how many people in Saskatchewan may be worse off if you cancel the carbon rebate?
Well, I talked to Kevin in Lalash, and he's quite concerned about it because he lives about 4 hours from his major center, a trip that he makes every week or 2 weeks at the least amount of time. I talked to Jamie, also up in the Lalash, Buffalo Narrows area, who is very much was challenged with the electric heat that he has in his home, of which the provincial government has made a move mirroring the federal government's decision on, but also living 3 to 4 hours away from a major center, a trip that he has to make often, both on the business side as well as a personal side with his family, and to get to work.
And I'll just end on the clean fuel regulation. So here in my province, we actually had our premier legislate an additional 8 cents on top of what New Brunswickers are paying at the pump with no justification for it. So would you plan to do a similar thing in Saskatchewan?
I'm not aware of what happened in that case in New Brunswick, so I can't say whether we would do a similar thing, but our overarching goal is to keep taxes as low as possible, in particular taxes that are ineffective, like the carbon tax.
And sir, would you agree that uncertainty around the price on pollution isn't good for businesses?
I would say that the price on pollution is creating uncertainty in the investment environment in Saskatchewan and Canada.
So you don't attribute any of the investments in our renewable energy sector or the new green economy to some of these policies from the federal government?
Listen, the economy that we have in Canada is not new. It may morph and move over time, but it's our Canadian economy. It's not a new economy, and we need to do everything we can to attract investment into it. And the carbon tax policy that was promised to be at cap out at $50, now $170, and who knows where now, combined with a number of other policies, are creating uncertainty for the investment environment. And I would say uncertainty that subnational leaders are trying to navigate through as best they can.
What kind of windfall would the oil and gas industry experience if the carbon levy was canceled?
There'd be no windfall. What you would see is a return to a significant investment into some of the cleanest oil and gas that is produced on Earth. And I think that would be a good thing for the globe.
That is our time. Actually, it's past our time. Thank you very much, Premier Moe, for sticking around. Colleagues, we're going to suspend for a few moments as we change the table and bring in Mr. Giroux and his team. We are suspended.
Hey everybody, I'm like a broken record, but anyone that's new to the channel, please like and subscribe, and those that would like to support the channel through financial means can do so by purchasing a super chat or sticker. Thank you. Also, memberships are available for anyone that would like to become a member of the channel.
Giroux and Ms. Van der Wees and Ms. Griswold, welcome back to OGGO. Do you have an opening statement, sir? The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Good morning or good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. We're pleased to be here to discuss our report on the government's expenditure plan and main estimates for 2024-25, which was published on March 7, 2024. With me today, I have our lead analysts on the reports, Jill Griswold and Caitlin Van der Wees. The government's main estimates for 2024-25 outline $449.2 billion in budgetary spending authorities. Parliament's approval is required for $191.6 billion. Statutory authorities total $257.6 billion. Consistent with previous estimates, Money transferred to other levels of government, individuals, and other organizations account for most of the planned spending, totaling $283 billion. Notable areas of planned spending in these main estimates include $81.1 billion for elderly benefits, $52.1 billion, for the Canada Health Transfer, and $46.5 billion for interest payments on the public debt. I will now continue en français. Le budget principal.
The main estimates for 2024-2025 also represent reallocations of almost $2.3 billion made as part of the refocusing government spending exercise. Further details on these reallocations can be found in the 2024-25 departmental plans that were tabled with the main estimates on the 29th of February 2024. As the 2024 budget has not yet been tabled, the 2024-25 main estimates do not obviously include the new budget measures. As a result, budget authorities for 2024-2025 will increase based on funding requests expected to be made in the supplementary estimates. Caitlin, Jill and I would be pleased and happy to answer your questions about our analysis of the main estimates. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux, and thank you, by the way, for sticking around. We'll start with Mr. Lawrence, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giroux, and you've been in the press almost as much as Miss Taylor Swift, I think, in recent days, with respect to your analysis of the carbon tax. And so I do want to just have a discussion of this, and so we can get some clarity on your report, because I think it's been as misreported and demagogued as it has been reported. So with respect to the financial impact, the total, which includes both not only the fiscal but the economic tax and carbon tax impact, for the average family where the backstop applies, is there more money coming into Canadians' pockets or leaving their pockets?
So there's two elements to that question. If one looks at the fiscal impact, that is the amount of the carbon tax paid directly, indirectly, and the GST that applies on these embedded or direct carbon taxes paid minus the carbon rebate, most families are better off. We estimate around 80%. However, once we estimate also, we include the economic impacts of the introduction of a carbon tax, we find that these economic impacts of introducing a carbon tax, they'll have impacts on some sectors of the economy, the oil and gas sector, the transportation sector, for example, and investment income that will be slightly lower. Then we find that most Canadian families in provinces where the federal backstop regime is in place will see a small negative impact of the carbon tax.
So it for the average Canadian family, especially if we move forward into 2030, as this government is intent on increasing the carbon tax, we're going to see, because Canadians can't just opt out of the economic impact of the, so that, like, separating that, I understand why for sort of understanding it purposes, but the reality is that every Canadian is affected not only by the fiscal but the economic. So the net in 2030, Canadians will have, and now will have more money going out of their genes than coming into their genes.
Well, it's income growth that will be lower than it would otherwise have been. So that's what we refer to when we say a negative impact. It's not necessarily that their absolute level of income will go down, but the net impact is a reduction to a scenario where, compared to a scenario where there wouldn't be a carbon tax.
So if the carbon tax was canceled, Canadians would be, and everything else holds equal, Canadians would be wealthier.
Yes, they'd experience, on average, income growth that would be slightly faster than what will happen with a carbon tax.
Perfect.
But that presumes that there's nothing that replaces our carbon tax.
Perfect. And then I just want to move on to your, get into some of the specifics. So in page 3 on your recent carbon tax report, in table 2, you have an average of average of the fiscal impact. And then in Alberta, you say the net cost is $2,773. In my province of Ontario, it's $1,820. So is that to say that the average family in Alberta would lose $2,773, and the Ontario family $1,820? That would be the cost of the carbon tax to their family or the household, as you say. Is that an accurate understanding, Mr. Giroux?
Well, that's compared to a scenario where there wouldn't be a carbon tax, so it's not necessarily losing, but it's lower growth or income growth than would otherwise be the case. So in that sense, yes, you can characterize it as losing compared to a scenario where there is no carbon tax.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Giroux. You've had one of the questions that has also been posed with respect to the fuel charge is the cost, the net fiscal and economic cost, greater than the rebate? Keeping it with the fiscal and the economic, is that greater than the rebate in all the provinces where the where the carbon backstop applies? My apologies, non-stop carbon.
That's the case for most income quintiles, except for those at the very in the bottom 20% of income quintiles. It varies by province, so it depends on the specific economic fabric and income distribution and household composition. But generally speaking,
one of the ways that I've heard referred to as a carbon tax is that it's sand or that is in the gears of the Canadian economy, and it's slowing our productivity. We saw Tiff Macklin come before this committee and saying it's adding a third of inflation, and Canada is facing, as the governor of Bank of Canada or deputy governor said, we are facing a productivity. Do you believe? Crisis, I should say. Do you believe that the reduction of the carbon tax would allow us to be more productive?
I'm not certain about that, because reducing the carbon tax or eliminating it would certainly have economic impacts, but I'm not convinced that it would do anything with respect to productivity. So it's not something that we have looked at, like the productivity impact of a carbon tax or not. I think there are many factors that come into play when determining productivity, and the productivity increases or increases in productivity of specific sectors. So I wouldn't venture that far into the analysis.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kuzmierczuk, please.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chair. And thank you again, Mr. Giroux, for being here with us today. Always enjoy your insights and enjoy the knowledge that you share with us. You've stated when you've done your analysis on carbon pricing, you said that we need to sort of look at the broad picture, and to sort of continue on the theme of Saskatchewan here today. Last year, you look at a report on the CBC. Last year in 2023, there were 494 fires that had burned about 1.9 million hectares. And the Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency, the Vice President, Steve Roberts, said that in his 25 years experience, he's never seen anything like it. And you look at, in that same article, Colin Larocque, who's a professor at the University of Saskatchewan, has said, and I quote, "We had huge fires, astronomical numbers." And on that note, the Insurance Bureau of Canada stated that climate-related weather disasters cost insurers $3.1 billion in damage last year. $3.1 billion. Tell me, you've stated that your analysis doesn't consider the costs of climate change, the costs of doing nothing, which is what the Conservative members have put on the table, nothing to address climate change. Explain to us why you didn't look at the cost of climate change, which to me boggles the mind that you wouldn't include the cost of climate change. That is so obvious to anyone that sees the fires burning.
So that's an interesting question. And in fact, I'm glad that you're asking me because it's a question that gets raised very often. My mandate is to estimate the cost of government proposals. So the carbon tax is a government proposal. The cost of climate change is a relatively new area, and we have tried to estimate the cost of climate change under two scenarios where all the commitments are fully respected globally, as well as another scenario where only actions that have been implemented are in fact implemented, nothing more. And we find that there is a cost. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but there will be costs to climate change and over a long period of time. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that even like greenhouse gases, they've been emitted over decades, if not centuries, and it's a stock issue as much as it is a flow issue. So two issues to distinguish here. Even if the world was to stop emitting greenhouse gases today, there would still be global warming because the planet, according to climate scientists, has already warmed up. So if we were to stop emitting greenhouse gases, the forest fires that have presumably been attributed to climate change could continue. And it's not me saying that, it's climate scientists. So there's that issue that one has to keep in mind, even though there have been climate elements and climate events, climate-related events. So that the climate policies will prevent things from getting worse. But the point at which we are today, that's where we are.
It just, with all due respect, and I really appreciate your analysis and the work that you and your team do. It's hard work, but it seems to me that you are only looking at one side of the ledger when it comes to this analysis, Mr. Drew. Is it fair to say you're really looking at
Mr.
one?
Mr. Kuzmirchuk, we lost you there for a bit. Do you mind starting just at the beginning, and I'll restart your time?
Sure.
Just that
thank
last
you.
statement.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like you're only looking on one side of the ledger. You're not weighing the costs of climate change here. Is it fair to say that your analysis is only looking at really one side of the ledger?
Analysis is typically a cost analysis, which is what I've been mandated by Parliament to do. So estimating the costs of proposals. If there is further analysis that is deemed feasible and required, I'm sure that there are lots of think tanks out there that are more than happy to do that analysis, looking at the cost-benefit analysis. And the government, if the government itself has cost-benefit analysis, I'm sure it would be more than happy to disclose that. To my knowledge, there hasn't been that much work undertaken on the cost-benefit analysis because it's a complicated field that requires lots of data spanning several years. So that's why, even though would be ideal to have the cost-benefit analysis, the benefits are always not very tangible and not easily measurable.
How much time, Chair?
We've got about a minute.
Okay, great. So because I take issue with your net analysis, I think it's incomplete, and I think it only looks at one side of the ledger. If we just look at the fuel charge impacts directly, which you speak about as well too, and you talked about 8 out of 10 households being better off. Can you speak to that a little bit when you're just looking at the impact of the fuel charge and as compared to the Canada carbon rebate? You mentioned 8 out of 10 families are better off. Can you speak to that just on the fuel charge, not the net analysis?
So when we look at the impact of the fuel charge, the amount that households pay directly, so when they fill up the gas tank or when they heat their houses, and the embedded energy component of goods they buy or services they buy, we look at that and we compare that with the carbon rebate they get. We find that, roughly speaking, 4 out of 5 households are better off with a carbon tax and the rebate than without.
Thank you. That's very clear. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 6.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Giroux, Ms. Vanderlis, Ms. Giswell, thank you very much for being back with us here again. You know, I have a great deal of admiration for the analytical work that you do. It's very precise, it's invaluable, it's really in-depth, and it's really hard work that you do. I really appreciate it greatly. Moreover, for the main estimates 2024-2025, the government didn't see fit to put its PDF document on its own website. So you'll forgive me for saying this, but we had to refer to a CSV format, which was completely illegible, or just look at it on the screen and take notes on a piece of paper. So congratulations to you for having been able to produce your report on time, given all of those constraints and difficulties. Now, the Canada Health Transfer will increase by $2.7 billion, apparently. This is a hypothesis, a supposition. The main estimates came out before the budget, which was announced, slated for the 16th of April, so everything could change. Now, let's say that there really is an increase of $2.7 billion and that the transfers will be for a total of over $50 billion, as you stated in your report. Now, were the government to meet the demands of premiers across Canada, i.e. to transfer 35% of their healthcare budget, well, what would the total healthcare transfers be? Do you have a sense? Unfortunately, I don't have the figures right here at my disposal, but a couple of years back, we did a study to estimate the share of the provincial expenditures in healthcare that was covered or offset by the Canada Health Transfer. And one of our findings that I recall quite well, in fact, is that the definition of healthcare per se had evolved over time in order to cover more services. And that, of course, it changes the total amount with a view to achieving a particular target. But unfortunately, I don't have the figures here. The main estimates that were tabled in late February, early March contains several $100 billion in spending, $449 billion, and the lion's share of that is transfers to the provinces, to organisations, and to Canadians and Quebecers. And there's $81 billion in elderly benefits in that total budgetary envelope. So what would the total of that particular transfer be were there not two categories or classes of seniors? For example, the 65 to 75-year-olds, had they gotten the same benefit as seniors over 75 years of age? Well, we don't have those figures right here at our disposal. And furthermore, it was perhaps in a previous report that we did take a closer look on those figures, but the seniors' benefits have increased to the tune of $9 billion in 2023-2024, and seniors' eligibility of 75 years and over was in fact broadened. Now, from a demographic standpoint, a lot of the old age security recipients between 65 and 75 years of age, well, the cost was probably roughly the same or slightly more, but I don't have the figures once again. Public debt is 10.4% of the budget. That's $46 odd billion. So about 10%, because the budget is a $450 billion budget. If the budget was smaller, then the proportion would be different. That goes without saying. Now, that debt rate, is that sound? Is it healthy? I know that we're already engaging in this process, but should we be sounding the alarm bells even louder and saying, stop. This is getting dangerous. Well, that's a sensitive issue to respond to in absolute terms. From an historical standpoint, if you go back to the 90s, there were debt servicing costs that required about a quarter of federal revenues, or a third rather, and that was alarming. It's far less alarming nowadays, given that that proportion of federal revenue is much smaller. Now, that said, we could be using $46 billion in many other ways were we not saddled with this kind of debt. So I guess there's a couple of ways of looking at it. Overall, it's not a huge number, nor is it a huge number in terms of the historical backdrop, but $46 billion nevertheless is more than what is allocated for national defence, more than what is earmarked for elderly benefits, and it's a tad less than what the federal government gives to the provinces for healthcare services, and including the budget for healthcare in Quebec, says Ms.
Luis, please, back to you, sir.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you, Mr. Giroux, to you and your whole team for working with us today in this study. And I get the sense that one can ask, finally, questions that have to do with the actual mandate of this committee today, which is a relief. Now, Mr. Giroux, there's a huge housing crisis that's been getting worse over the years, and I'd like to hone in on, and I want this to be in the committee's minutes and transcript, this crisis is even worse in the First Nations communities. And we're having trouble meeting our objectives in terms of providing housing, both in terms of number and quality housing, to Indigenous communities. Now, in 2015, 2022, it went from 20.8% to 17.5% of First Nation homes that require major renovations and retrofitting. The number of houses that need to be replaced hasn't gone down, it's increased over the same period. And as far as the building new housing units is concerned, only 20% of the total volume required to make up for the to be in line with the Canadian average. So in terms of building housing units, it's going to, the budget envelope will be going up modestly. Now, how do you feel that the federal government can actually attain the objectives that it set for 2023 with those kinds of cutbacks to Indigenous housing? Well, that's a very good question. Unfortunately, I don't think that I'm the person who's best placed to respond to that question. I.e., how should we attain those objectives or meet the needs of the First Nations and their housing? I think that you might get a better answer from the Minister for Indigenous Services. Well, do you have a sense, have you assessed the total investment that would be required to offset that discrepancy? Now, we have reported on the housing needs of Indigenous peoples in terms of the investment required by the federal government, and I think that we took into account their needs when it comes to water and sewage systems in First Nations communities in recent years, but I'm not sure that we specifically reported on First Nations housing needs. I can get back to you on that with an answer, a written answer, if you see fit. Yes, I'd very much like that. I know that you have your work cut out for you, but that kind of information will help us in our work and help us develop better public policies for Inuit and First Nations communities. Now, I'd like to turn to a different issue. There's the whole Arrive scam, ArriveCan scandal. Now, exorbitant, sometimes even scandalous costs of outsourcing and the Auditor General talked about the double or triple the cost that the public service would be charged for that kind of work. Is that your assessment as well? Well, we didn't take a look at those amounts to determine whether Canadian taxpayers got bang for their buck when it comes to outsourcing or subcontracting. But what we did determine is that the expenditures on consulting has increased substantially over recent years, and many of those contractors provide services to veterans and First Nations, but there's also been an increase in consultancy when it comes to IT, or policy advice or government stewardship advice, and the public service has also increased in size proportionately. And what I've stressed in my appearances before many committees is, why are we using external consultants when there's even more public servants being hired? And so that begs the question, are we hiring the right people if the government is still using these contractors when they're increasing the size of the public service? But more specifically, in response to your question, we haven't determined whether the Canadians are getting bang for their buck. That is the purview of the Auditor General. Thank you for your answer. It was interesting to get an understanding of these two parallel phenomena. It is difficult to understand. We're talking about billions of dollars, $22 billion in contracts awarded to contractors. Are Canadians and Quebecers getting bang for their buck? Or is there duplication here? Are there other cases similar to ArriveCan that in fact haven't made the headlines? Well, I wouldn't venture to say that there are other cases similar to ArriveCan. I wouldn't go so far as to say that. But the fact is that there are contractors used to provide policy advice and also management advice in the public service when that expertise already exists within the public service to provide advice and counsel to ministers. And that's somewhat surprising that contractors are used in that domain. Now, the same is true when it comes to providing advice. The public service should be able to do this, but often contractors are relied upon. Are there cases similar to ArriveCan? Well, my office doesn't have the capacity to undertake that kind of assessment, but it's my understanding that the Auditor General is investigating those issues.
Please.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be able to pose questions to you today, Mr. Giroux. Earlier this week, I was speaking with a single mother working full-time along with a side hustle from home, and 100% of her income is covering her mortgage. She relies solely on food banks and her credit card that is maxed. It's getting increasingly difficult. A StatsCan report on food insecurity released in November of last year referenced female lone parent families, or single mothers, as one of the highest groups, with 48% experiencing food insecurity. So food insecurity means more than just a child going hungry each week if their parents cannot afford the groceries. Kids experiencing food insecurity are less likely to get the nutrition they need to grow healthy and develop, and they're more likely to develop mental health problems. When food prices go up and there's less money in the household budget, there really are significant impacts on health and wellness. My question to you is the intersection of food inflation and the carbon tax impacting the household budget?
So a question that is quite valid, but it's something that we have not looked at specifically. So we have done work on the carbon fuel charge, the carbon tax. Sorry if I'm misnaming it. But we have not looked in details at the impact of the fuel charge on food inflation. However, as was referred to a couple of times in this committee, the Bank of Canada has looked at the impact of the fuel charge on general inflation, and So it's 0.15%, if I remember correctly.
So
and
if I may, just
Sure.
to be more specific, are the details based on, are they premised on two people under a roof sharing the load or on one individual?
When you refer to inflation, inflation refers to, as defined by Statistics Canada, refers to the price evolution of a basket of goods and services that is representative of what a typical household will buy. So
And the typical household is changing.
it is changing, as is the basket of goods and services that they need or they purchase on average. And it's based on surveys and based on consumption patterns. So Statistics Canada is probably a better place to answer how they themselves design their basket of goods
Then
and services.
perhaps I'll switch gears and speak specifically on C-234. You've previously reported that Bill C-234 will save farmers nearly $1 billion by 2030. A more recent costing note by your office estimates that the Senate amendments to the bill will cut carbon tax relief to farmers by $910 billion. Is that accurate?
It probably is million. I don't have that note in front of me, but there were several amendments to this bill in the Senate, and it's been referred to a couple of times. So forgive me if I don't know all of the details and I don't remember them off the top of my head. But what I remember is that we were talking about less than $1 billion in its last version or latest version.
And speaking more specifically to how the report indicated that the Canadians will pay $486 million in GST on the carbon tax this year and over $1 billion per year in GST by 2030. Do farmers receive any rebates on the GST that they pay on the carbon tax?
My understanding is that farmers are eligible to get back the GST they pay as input tax credits, and also that our analysis for households includes the carbon tax they pay directly, indirectly, as well as the GST that's applied to the carbon tax, direct and indirect.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass it to my colleague.
Thank you. Yeah, I rarely correct you, Mr. Giroux, but on this occasion, I am going to correct you. The governor at Bank of Canada at Finance Committee said it's 0.6% of inflation is directly responsible for carbon tax. It's the increase that's 0.15. So it's 0.6 this year if it were removed, and then ongoing 0.15. And given that after the April 1st increase, if we don't cancel the hike, it'll be nearly 0.8% of inflation. I understand you haven't studied food specifically, but if it's reducing the overall basket of goods by 0.8, it almost certainly has to increase the cost of food. Is that not correct?
Yes, but I would assume that the impact of the carbon tax on the price of food is probably not significant, even though there has been increases in price of food. Not all of it, only a fraction can be attributable to the carbon tax.
Yeah, I think we could maybe split hairs into what that fraction is, but I think though what I want Canadians to leave this meeting with, and I think we agree. You can certainly say differently, but that the carbon tax increases the price of food.
Yes, I would probably say to some extent. But.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sousa, please, for 5 minutes. Sorry, you're not coming through, Mr. Sousa. You're not showing muted. Are you plugged in properly? Mr. Sousa, I think we're going to go with Mr. Drouin, and then we'll finish with you.
Yeah.
Well, I think we got you now, Mr. Sousa.
You got me now?
Please go ahead for 5.
So I appreciate the discussion that we've been having today, and I recognize that pricing on carbon is being proposed as a great disincentive to our economic growth and activity, when in fact it's the very incentive that's enabling us to invest in other initiatives in the green economy. And it's enabling us to have that drive to do something now to protect future generations as we go forward. And oftentimes when I hear some of these discussions, and I've heard this one in the provincial side in Ontario, when we were deliberating over the price of carbon back in 2015 and 16 to offer an alternative, which we brought forward by way of cap and trade. And we were part of the Western Climate Initiative alongside Quebec and California. And Ontario is netting about $1.5 billion thereabouts annually to reinvest dollar for dollar in the green economy, in retrofits, in home renovations, and enabling us to get a head start on that green economy and in the opportunities to support families as we go forward and grow the economy. And it was the alternative. It exempted Ontario from going through a federal carbon pricing system because we already had initiated one. And it wasn't until the Conservative government that came in afterwards that dismantled that very initiative and brought forward a fight with the federal government over something that they lost through a constitutional debate. And in the end, we're faced with this alternative. But many economists are still suggesting and saying that this is a much better and cheaper way to go forward, is pricing carbon. And I appreciate some of the discussion that we've had today because of it, because it's not free. You know, pricing carbon is not something that we can make available to everyone. The greater polluters should be paying their fair share to enable those families, especially those single moms that was just referred to earlier, to net out greater benefit for themselves. And I know and I appreciate your reference to the fact that 4 out of 5, 8 out of 10 average families in Canada will benefit through their rebates in respect to this. And while at the same time enabling us to cause the higher polluters to pay their share and provide the incentive now to bring forward a new economy like we have in Saskatchewan with the alternative sources of trade that enables us to provide for cleaner alternatives, and that wouldn't exist had we not put these incentives in place in the first place. And to this point, I would like to ask, keeping in mind that many economists have also noted that this is a very cost-effective way to reduce emissions. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. Do you believe that those that cause pollution should pay for it?
That's, Mr. Sousa, that's a question for policymakers and legislators.
I'm asking you for your personal interpretation. I'm not asking you as a policyman. I'm asking you personally for future generations. Do you believe those that pollute in rivers, should they be stopping that or paying for it?
As an economist, I believe that externalities should be internalized. So those who cause negative consequences for society should be the ones who assume these costs as opposed to.
So is carbon pricing an effective way to reduce emissions?
Committee last week. Sorry. As I said to this committee last week, there is a wide consensus among economists, of which I am, I'm an economist, that carbon pricing is an effective way of reducing carbon emissions. And any other way of doing it will also have costs. I've been clear about that, and my office has also been clear about that.
So we just heard about a single mom who is with her kids. She now benefits from a lot of non-taxable benefits, a number of initiatives that the federal government has brought forward to support her in this affordability crisis, all of which has been opposed by the Conservative government. All of these initiatives to try to support that family has actually been opposed on the other side. And I like to nuance some of that recent narrative that's been around the impacts of the price on pollution and affordability, right? We've talked about the Bank of Canada, and the governor is being quoted, and he was quoted as saying that other climate effects and events are also placing a cost on food and a cost in respect to this and its volatility. And we can't just ignore it, put our heads in the sand and pretend it's going to go away. I'm wondering if you agree with the governor on this issue.
On the issue, could you be clear before I agree with something?
The issue is...
Sorry, let me interrupt. We're out of time. Can you, if you could just repeat it, Mr. Sousa, and we'll allow time for an answer,
The governor suggested that there are consequences of not putting a price on pollution, wildfires, floods, extreme weather conditions, all place a price on food.
Climate scientists are almost unanimous in saying that climate change will have impacts on our lives, and I'm willing to believe the science on this one, as on many things.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Sousa. Mrs. Vignola for 2.5, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. In a recent report, you referred to the fact that the carbon tax, the impact of the carbon tax on inflation was about 0.15%. Now, if inflation is 3%, now the inflation rate has been higher than that, it's going back down to something more reasonable, but let's assume that the inflation rate is around 3%. Does that mean that 0.15% is it of the 3%, or is it 2.85% inflation plus 0.15? Well, if you're talking about the impact of inflation, if we do take for granted that it is that amount, that percentage, well, inflation will be a tad higher because of the carbon tax. Now, an inflation rate without the carbon tax, 2.85%, with the carbon tax, 3%. I see. Well, let's say I had something that I bought for $100 before inflation, and it's an additional 3% because of inflation, so $103. So 15 cents is the result of the carbon tax. Now, it's a whole lot less than the Quebec sales tax, for example. Yes, that's true, but there are two things to bear in mind. Inflation is an annual phenomenon. We compare the prices compared to a year ago. So the prices increased over the course of that year, but there's also the cumulative effect. For example, if you completely scrap a tax, well, you eliminate the effects of previous years. So there'll be a sudden drop, but not a recurring drop, yes, but it will have a direct impact on inflation. Now, if I look at your table on Canada healthcare transfers that is calculated on a per capita basis. Now, the question that crossed my mind is this. Does that calculation factor in refugee claimants when it comes to the number of residents in Quebec or in any particular Canadian province? Well, I don't have the answer to that specific question. It's an interesting question, given everything that we're hearing in the news, but I know that it would be based on census data, but I'm not sure whether it would include non-residents when it comes to Canada healthcare transfers. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson.
Mr. Boulis, please, for 2.5, sir.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. And thanks again to the witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Giroux, we've spoken at length today about a price on pollution, inflation, and also the climate crisis, and whether or not the climate crisis has an impact on our communities from a public health standpoint, floods, forest fires, droughts, etc., etc. Is it possible to get our hands on an overall assessment of the economic impact, the financial cost to the federal government with this effects of climate change that are just increasing exponentially over the recent years? Well, that's a worthwhile question to look at, but it's not a question that my office actually did look at, i.e. the specific cost to the federal government of climate change. And I know that it's a matter of interest for many institutions in Canada, and also globally. But for the time being, our work is at an embryonic stage. We're just starting the process of estimating those costs, and it's subject to interpretation, and many people will question, well, I'm interested in my political party because we're talking here about the cost to consumers, for an industry, for individuals, but inertia, inaction also comes with a cost. And I think oftentimes we tend to forget this. Earlier you said that market mechanisms, such as a price on pollution or a carbon tax, do have incentivizing effects on consumers to change their behaviour. Now, based on your assessments in recent years, will that measure alone be enough for the federal government to attain our greenhouse gas emissions objectives? Response: we did a report on that in 2022, and I have a lot of documents right here on the table. I think it was November 2022, if I'm not mistaken, but we did analyse that issue, and we realised, like most observers, that the fuel tax and CO2 emissions tax, i.e. the carbon tax, is not enough to attain the Paris objectives or even exceed them, as the government undertook to do in the 2021 budget. So other initiatives and measures are required, which the government did announce in order to obtain the objectives that it set for itself. For example, the fact that, well, the carbon tax will enable us to reach 33.3% of our greenhouse gas emissions targets. So from memory, they're the findings that we have at this stage. Thank you.
Chambers, welcome to OGGO. Go ahead, please, sir, for 5.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Appreciate you being here with your colleagues, Ms. Giswald and Ms. van der Wees. I'd like to talk about everybody's favorite tax, the underused housing tax. Mr. Giroux, I'm not sure you are able to follow all of the inquiries of ministry, but just last week, the government tabled documents that showed since 2022, the federal government has spent upwards of $59 million on administering the underused housing tax.
Sorry, Mr. Chambers, I have to interrupt for a second. We're being told your microphone's not connected properly to your computer.
I apologize, Mr. Chair. I believe that's likely a little bit better.
Yeah, we're fine now. Go ahead, sir.
My apologies to the interpreters. Mr. Giroux, we were told by the CRA that they've spent upwards of $59 million administering the tax, but have only assessed $49 million worth of amounts owing. That's not collections, by the way, that's amounts owing. I'm just curious if you recall from your previous work, do you recall what the government expected to collect from that tax in the first couple of years?
You're right, Mr. Chambers, that with a team of 38, we cannot follow every single government initiatives. I don't remember off the top of my head how much the government was expected to collect on the underused housing tax. And I'm looking at my colleagues and they're avoiding eye contact. So it probably means they don't remember either. But it seems to be high to have numbers such as the ones you mentioned, that it would be costing so much to administer versus how much is assessed, which is often a significantly different number than what ends up being collected.
Thank you very much. My understanding is they expected to collect $200 million in the first year and about $165 million every year thereafter. If that is the case, and their experience is that they're only assessing $49 million worth of penalties, should the government take what effectively would be a write-down in that to adjust what is projected to assess and collect for future years, since it's not bringing in what they believe?
If the amounts assessed so far are indeed the final numbers or are indicative of what the government is expected to collect overall, I think there'll need to be a correction in the budget in terms of revenues to be collected. So if that's indeed the case, and it's not just the initial collection efforts that have had some difficult times getting underway, then we should see that reflected in the fiscal plan when the minister tables the budget in April, on April 16.
Thank you very much. Do you believe that it's appropriate, or should the CRA, when implementing a new tax like this, consider the costs of compliance on taxpayers with respect to the amount of direction or clarification that they provide taxpayers? Is that something they should be considering? There was an article yesterday that suggested that taxpayers are paying anywhere between $500 and $1,000 or more per filing of the underused housing tax paperwork, which they have to do every year.
It certainly would be a good idea in terms of policy making for the CRA to introduce that into the equation when I say CRA, but CRA and the Department of Finance, when they're briefing the minister or ministers and cabinet, ultimately to introduce new tax measures, to have an idea, or at least provide an idea to the ministers as to how much the burden will be on individuals and businesses. And also, I know they do that. They probably also include the number of employees they'll need to administer these new taxes or amended tax provisions. So it's data that would certainly be possible to have at least an order of magnitude when introducing new measures such as the underused housing tax.
Thank you very much. Last question. I want to thank you very much for the work you've done on tracking departmental spending plans and the impacts on the government's people plan. The government continues to send legislation to this parliament with no projections on the impact on people, and yet your office is the only office that shows consistently, time after time, the government suggests a people projection and fails to meet it every single time. In fact, the numbers go up every year instead of down as they project. How do you recommend parliamentarians get a better handle on or require more transparency for the government on its people plan?
A brief answer if you're able to.
Having more clarity as to exactly how many employees initiatives will require for their proper administration would be a good first step. And also the employee impact of reallocation measures would certainly be a good impact. But I'll stop there for lack of time. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Mr. Drouin, please, for 5 or so.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And just to inform you, we'd like to raise something before you put that gavel down. So just to after I'm done, merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup à notre.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to our Officer of Parliament, who always does a great job. I'd like to talk about the 22nd of November 2022 report. No, sorry, 2022 report, yes. The report where you analysed the impact of climate change on Canada's GDP. And I think that you arrived at the conclusion that it was about 1% as a result solely of climate change. Could you elaborate on that, please? The analysis that you did on climate change's impact on the GDP of Canada. Do you actually remember? Well, I don't have that good a memory because we produce many reports each and every year, but I do have the report actually here. So our estimations based on external sources, including the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is that there were temperature changes to the tune of 0.9 degrees surface temperatures, an increase in precipitation compared to the 1991 and 2010 averages, and that has already reduced the GDP by 2.08%. And the ongoing effects of climate change will further reduce GDP by an additional 1.6% upcoming years. And we've based that on a number of hypotheses, factoring in climate mitigation efforts and subject to the objectives being met. Now, what about your most recent report on the price of pollution? And I think that my colleague, Mr. Husmerchuk, mentioned this earlier, but I just want to get a handle on this. When you conduct an economic impact analysis, are you presupposing that there are no technological advancements over that decade? Well, there are a number of variables, and they're not constant variables. Our modelling, in fact, does factor in climate change and changes in technology. But this study is through till 2030, which is kind of a short time frame for Canada's economy. And what's often mentioned in briefings is that nothing points to the fact that there would be an economic advantage after 2030. But between now and 2030, those costs are measurable. And the benefits of a transition to a less carbon-intensive economy will still not be fully implemented. We have time. This process is quite quick, but we haven't yet incorporated the new technologies that will help to offset the damage caused by climate change. We have relative data concerning on the use of fossil fuels, and if we eliminate them quickly, well, there is an upshot to that. There's stranded assets that would be taken out of circulation before their normal end-of-life cycle. So to a large extent, that explains the costs. Question. Most economists are going to say, and there are Nobel Prize winners who've said this, that they say that it's important to have a price on carbon. It indicates to the market, this is the direction we're heading in. If you use X, Y, or Z product and it's carbon intensive, you're going to pay the price. And consumers understand. They know that, they're better off if they buy an electric vehicle because they know that they're not going to have to pay for gas, for example. Now, in your analyses, do you look at those kinds of factors? Response. Well, we do take into account behavioural aspects in our modelling. For example, the impact of a carbon tax that is maintained and actually increases. But as I said, we're talking about a 5 or a 6 year time frame, and that's not enough to offset for the negative impacts to be offset by the positive impacts. But we nevertheless need to have some kind of planning, to have some kind of certainty, and that would demonstrate that there are benefits to carbon pricing.
Inform farmers that they are eligible for a part of the rebate for the price on pollution that they pay. It's not the full price, but it's up to $1.86 per farm expense. So I'm just encouraging them to sign up, as it's not the full price. And I'm sure my colleague, Mr. Lawrence, and obviously Ms. Cramp-Newman, who have farmers in their area, would encourage them to sign up. So merci. Thank you, Chair.
That was a wonderful plug, even if it was a few seconds over. And thank you for joining OGGO and making that plug. We should charge you attendance fee for that. With that, we thank Mr. Giroux, Ms. Griswold, and Ms. Van der Rees, as always, for joining us. Appreciate your time. And I think Mr. Sousa.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to confirm the motion that was brought forward earlier today, outlining the procedures and process by which we proceed going forward. And I've not received any idea. There's no one on this committee that's been notified of a meeting anytime soon. We don't know what witnesses are coming before us. So I just want to confirm with the committee and with you that, in fact, we have no more meetings this week. Is that correct?
No
and
meeting.
I want the committee to, and I want the members to engage here.
Yeah, notice is out for the meeting tomorrow, Mr. Sousa.
Pardon me?
The meeting notice is out already for tomorrow and went out before today started.
But that's not now in compliance. Is that correct? You don't have agreement here.
No, I believe it is in compliance. My understanding, looking at the motion, we have future meetings as well that we have booked for both the NDP study on Canada Post. We've got the red tape reduction a meeting booked with witnesses. I assume that we look at the motion as for future ones that we are starting, that we will follow this.
Yes, I don't think we're aware of that. I think we don't have consent, Mr. Chair, to proceed for tomorrow, given that we have not provided notice and we're still not aware of who the witnesses are. Who are the witnesses tomorrow? That's not even been discussed.
It's on the notice, Mr. Sousa. If you look at the notice, you will see who's been booked, and again, it went out before the meeting started.
I think there is a lack of desire to proceed without having prior consultation as a result of the motion that we brought forward today. And I suspect that we are going to request that we cancel the meeting for tomorrow as a result of the violation of the privileges to the members of this committee who have not been notified appropriately.
Okay, well, thank you. I've got several others speaking. I have Mr. Chambers, then Mr. Kuzmierczuk, then Ms. Atwin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, my view is the notice has already gone out for tomorrow before we pass that motion. So if the member or the government members wanted to be very clear, the motion they brought forward was actually silent on what we were supposed to do about tomorrow. They could have easily made that clarification at that time. And so I leave the discretion to you as the discretion of the chair, which is used at every other committee, by the way. To the extent that the government members are upset about this, perhaps they should be careful because it's their committee chairs at other committees who take much greater liberties with the standing orders with respect to this.
Thanks, and I appreciate it. And I will note out again, for example, actually both upcoming studies, we've had to extend witnesses, and actually I've also had to go in and fill witnesses for both an NDP and Liberal study. So it has happened before where I've had to go out and find witnesses. But again, Mr. Chambers is right. It did go out before that. But go ahead, Mr. Kuzmierczuk.
Yeah, I was just going to say, again, I disagree with how the meeting tomorrow that's scheduled was organized. We were not consulted. We were provided no opportunities for instruction. There was no consultation. There was no discussion. It doesn't provide us the time we need to prepare for an important meeting. Every meeting is important, but especially meetings such as that one with the witnesses. And this is not how we've conducted business in the 5 years that I have been on committee. And so I am simply registering my absolute wholehearted disagreement with the way all of these meetings have been scheduled this week. And it is not aligned with the motion that we passed earlier in today. And I want to register my complete disagreement and disappointment with how these last 3 meetings have been organized, completely without any consultation input from this committee. Thank you.
Ms. Atwin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to reiterate what my colleagues have shared, reading in a global news article that we were going to have a meeting Thursday, really disappointing. It defeats the collaborative atmosphere that I think we're all trying to achieve here. We have really important work to do. I think we very much were distracted from that important work today, and on our focus on main estimates, it kind of went down a path that it shouldn't have, and I see that will be the case for tomorrow as well. I just really think again that OGGO is a very important committee. You state this yourself at the beginning of our meetings all the time, the only committee that matters. So let's proceed in a way that's respectful of all of our time, of our constituency time as well. This has happened repeatedly now since Christmas. It's really important to me to connect with my community. And so that for me is a big piece that's missing here as well. But again, to read about a committee meeting and witnesses in a global news article, what happened there, Mr. Chair? I mean, we really need to have an atmosphere of respect here, and I'd like to see it return to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll address that before I get to you, Mr. Sousa. Very clearly, I do not talk to Globe, whoever you're referring to. I saw on Twitter our Premier Higgs talking about it, but that's him talking about it, not the committee. So, Mr. Sousa?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, given the discussions that we're having, maybe it's appropriate just to put forward a motion again, given the lack of consultations and lack of advisement to us and the violation of our privileges as members. If all agree, I'd like to put forward a motion that we cancel tomorrow's meeting.
Before I get to that, it's not a violation of privileges for the chair to book, and I'm happy to actually read the exact wording for everyone from the big green book, but appreciate what you're saying, but appreciate we also stick to kind of the facts. It's not a violation of your privileges for me as chair to book a meeting.
It appears everyone else seems to know about these meetings before us, including the premiers and including witnesses that are being
This might come as a
advised.
shock to you, Mr. Sousa, but witnesses can't be called until...
Again, without consultation and without discussion with this, and we have other priorities that we were looking at going forward, and you haven't made those happen. You have not advanced the other
Point of
issues.
order, I believe there's a motion on the floor.
Yeah, I was just stating, I guess, correcting Mr. Sousa, you can argue as you wish, and that's fine. I appreciate that. I appreciate all sides to this, and I appreciate your feelings on this, but it's your privileges have not been violated. For example, we invited witnesses for a Liberal study because none of the Liberals had put forward witnesses. That is not a violation of your privileges. But I understand what you're saying. I just wanted to clear that one point because I think it's an important one. Yeah. We will start a speaking order. Hold on 2 seconds. So this is on...
Just a point of order there, Mr. Chair.
Before we get to that, we are on I see Mr. Druin has his hand up, but we're going to get to Mr. Sousa's motion you just brought in. But I have a point of order first, Mr. Lawrence.
Yeah, we are not currently in committee business, and this is not of the subject matter, and so I believe that this motion is out of order.
I appreciate that, Mr. Lawrence, but I understand procedurally it is. Mr. Kuzmierczak, on Mr. Sousa's motion or a different issue?
Yes, on this motion. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chair, the trust that is fundamental to the work of this committee has been broken. The principle of collaboration that underpins all of our work here on Parliament Hill and in this committee has been broken. And I turn to you, sir, and I say that this is an opportunity here today for us and for you to begin the work of repairing that trust and repairing that relationship that is broken. And I do place that on your shoulders, sir. And what I would recommend is that you work together with the members of all parties around this table, as you've done in the past, to work together with all the members around this table to pick a date, to pick a time that works for this committee. If it's the will of this committee to bring those witnesses forward and to have this discussion, then work with us, Mr. Chair, work with us, as has been your tradition at the beginning of your term as the chair of this committee. And so I ask you to work to repair this trust, repair this relationship. Let's put this committee back on track, and let's rebuild that relationship and that trust. And I believe it begins today with this motion, sir. And I ask you to consider the objections that this committee has brought forward publicly about the way that we've been conducting business here over the last several weeks. And I ask that you help us, again, rebuild the trust. Let's rebuild the relationship, and let's put this committee back on track. And I ask you for that, sir. And I look to your leadership on that.
Thanks. I have Mrs. Vignola, then Mr. Druin.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Well, I tend to agree with the motion that was moved by the Liberals, which doesn't happen that often, I might add. Now, normally I have something to say to Liberal motions, and I try to, in fact, foster a consensus. I'm patient. In fact, I'm surprised at how patient I am, to be honest. I am a straight shooter. I'm an open book. I really think that being frank is important. And unlike what many people say about politics, and when I was elected, well, politics is not a game. Politics is about service. And politics is not about reading budgets cover to cover, about reading pieces of legislation and bills cover to cover, doing the requisite research to really get a handle on issues and to be well informed without having a bias and ask questions of experts and get their points of view. When people write to me and they don't understand, well, I respond to them, here's the point of view of the Bloc, here's the New Democrat standpoint, here's the Liberal standpoint, and because all of those combined help to inform our voters. Now, right now, at this juncture, I think there are folks taking politics, seeing politics as if it were a game. And as politicians, which is not a game, you know, this is not a game, as I said. We are trying to achieve things that are important for all Canadians, all Quebecers, and of course, part and parcel of this is looking after our constituents in our ridings, and it's really tough to do this when, at the very last moment, we are called to a committee meeting. And listen, I've been, you know, I've been a good player here. But I have had to push back meetings. I've acted in good faith, but I've had to push back meetings, and it's not because of these witnesses appearing tomorrow. Of course, they're entitled to appear if they want to appear, but we need enough time to give them a proper welcome and to have time to research and to really get a handle on the files at question. For example, New Brunswick and how its role vis-a-vis the federal government. That is, you know, and when you get a notice of less than 24 hours, I can't turn on a dime. I can't turn on a dime. You know, there are bloody limits here, and I'm sorry, I'm using the word bloody because I don't want to use more unparliamentary language that's harsher than the word bloody. So yes, I'm going to support this motion. Calling for, respectfully, that this meeting be postponed to later so that we can be better prepared, so that we can better study the issues at hand, and so that we can meet these witnesses, listen to these witnesses. These premiers are not puppets. They shouldn't be used as political pawns and puppets, and the onus is on us to show them the respect that is due to them and to be well prepared for our line of questioning. So I support this motion.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et Madame.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Vignola, I guess it's because I'm here that you're supporting my motion. We've worked so well together collaboratively in the past. I say that facetiously.
Obviously, you can see where this is going. We will have to deal with this tomorrow. And if the motion, we wouldn't be dealing with this today, we'd have to deal with this tomorrow. The majority of the members are not in accordance with what has transpired, and I'm not going to judge anything. I have respect for you, Mr. Chair, but obviously you are at the command of the majority of the members, and I think on our side we're ready to vote.
Mr. Lawrence?
Thank you very much, and I think that it's important to put some context into the meeting today. When we look at the carbon tax, we heard today testimony from the PBO. We've heard testimony from the Governor of Bank of Canada, both nonpartisan experts in their respective field, that the carbon tax is in fact causing individuals to go hungry. It's causing children to not be able to eat at night and go to bed hungry. This is a significant issue. And so my understanding of it, and I could be wrong, I have no inside information, but my understanding of it is that the premiers wrote to the Finance Committee and asked before the April 1st, when the carbon tax is set to increase by 23%. We don't have much time here, so we can postpone and live in an imaginary world where this doesn't exist, but it does. We have April 1st deadline. They wrote to the Finance Committee, the Liberal Finance Committee, and he deemed it that it was inappropriate, that somehow the premiers, that millions of Canadians should not have a voice, that we should just all sit here and watch children not be able to eat at night because it might upset our schedule? Are you kidding me? How out of touch?
Hey,
we are here. Hey,
hold on. What about
everyone to just take it
I'm
down
sorry,
a bit.
but je ne mangeais.
Listen, I missed meals, sometimes a whole day's meals, and the carbon tax didn't exist back then. Now, is the carbon tax really doing all of this? Can we get back to brass tacks? It's important to hear from premiers, but it's important to not use them as political pawns, and I would like to put people on notice in that regard.
Thanks. Before we continue, we just remind everyone of your voice levels with our interpreters, please.
My
Mr.
apologies,
Lawrence, please.
Yeah, my apologies to the interpreter. But I'm not apologizing for my comments because they represent the reality. We heard today from the Parliamentary Budget Officer that the carbon tax is increasing food. We're facing an affordability crisis. I met yesterday with a single mom, has a couple kids, whose mortgage eats up her entire paycheck. So she has to use a food bank. Like, this is not a laughing matter. This is serious, guys. And premiers wrote to the Finance Committee, and the Liberal chair decided that their voice wasn't important, that the millions of Canadians that they represent didn't count. And so, yes, our chair followed proper parliamentary procedure and called a meeting so that the premiers, the leaders of millions of Canadians, could testify from New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, from Saskatchewan, from Alberta. I'm sorry that we had to move around our schedules. I know that we're all very busy, but millions of Canadians want to express their view that the carbon tax is hurting families and it's hurting Canadians. And so, yes, I don't think it's asking too much for 12 members of Parliament to move around their schedule for their voices to be heard. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else wish to speak on this? Sorry, is Mr. Yeah, I'll get you. Yeah, I'll get to Mrs. Vignola and Mr. Lawrence. Did we get Mr. Backrack checked in? Are you joining us and we're losing Mr. Boulerace?
Hi, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, I don't have my headphones.
Okay, we'll recognize thumb up or thumb down for you then.
Thanks.
Yeah, Mrs. Vignola, then Mr. Lawrence.
J'inviterai Monsieur Lawrence à mettre son écoute.
Well, I'd like Mr. Lawrence to put on his headset because previously, before I put my colleague on notice regarding the fact that we don't need, it doesn't have to be just due to a carbon tax that people can't pay their rent or they have to skip meals, because I actually did both of those things for years. And there wasn't a carbon tax back then. But honestly, we need to be respectful towards our witnesses. We need to really dive deep into the issues that they're experts on before we question them. You know, it's not just a matter of having people showed up who've been who've been asking to see us for months. It's a matter of respect towards the witnesses. I know that the 1st of April is on the horizon, and it's not April Fool's here that I'm referring to. But the fact of the matter is, we need to be respectful towards our premiers, their valuable time, which is just as invaluable as ours is, if not more, and whether it be a premier from a Canadian province or the province of Quebec, they have a hell of a lot of responsibilities, and so we need to be respectful towards them. I don't think that my 80-hour shift of per week suggests that I'm lazy, and the reason I'm speaking now against having these meetings is because I'm lazy. It's not about that. I work hard. It's a matter of respect to those witnesses that we have before us. And we also have teams that are working in the background, and we're continuously, keeping their nose to the grindstone, leaving them in panic mode, when really we should be more respectful towards them and towards the witnesses. None of this should be rushed through. I just wanted to put that on the record. I'm ready to vote whenever you see fit.
Thank you. And to the extent that my colleague took any personal offense, I apologize. I was not in any ways intending that she was lazy in other ways. What I am saying, and I make no apologies for this, is that Canadians are facing an affordability crisis. And thank you for sharing your personal story. And I've heard from tens, if not hundreds of people in my riding who are going through that exact scenario. And the reality is, the facts are the facts. The Parliamentary Budget Officer came before us today and told us...
Point of order.
Yes, Ms. Atwin?
I believe we're debating a motion that's on the floor, so I'd like to question the relevance of Mr. Lawrence's comments right now.
I think he is speaking on it, but we always allow very wide latitude with debate. Go ahead, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you very much. And so, just to respond to that, what I'm talking about is the carbon tax, which is what the premiers wrote to the Finance Committee about, which was the genesis of the situation of which we find ourselves to right now. We've seen 7 out of 10 premiers objecting to the federal implementation of the carbon tax, and the carbon tax has caused significant financial challenges for Canadians. And it's this Prime Minister who has chosen to divide Canadians for political purposes. It's this Prime Minister who said that Canadians in one part of the country have to pay the tax while others don't. It's this Prime Minister and this little
Point of order. I don't see how this relates to whether or not we meet tomorrow.
Mr. McKinnon, if you could just wait for us to interrupt and recognize you for your point of order, but go ahead now, please, sir.
Sorry, I don't really see the relevance of how this relates to our decision before us to meet tomorrow or not.
Thanks. You can continue, Mr. Lawrence.
Point is that this Prime Minister and this Liberal government has always operated by dividing, seeking to pit different groups of Canadians against each other.
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. McKinnon.
The decision before us is whether we meet tomorrow or not. It has nothing to do with allegations about what this government is up to. I encourage all members to stick to the topic at hand.
I'm afraid that's not for you to encourage other members, but we take your point, Mr. McKinnon. Mr. Lawrence, you can continue, sir.
Point of order. It is entirely my privilege.
I'm sorry, Mr. McKinnon. If you wish to have a point of order, that's fine, but please wait till I recognize you.
Very well.
Go ahead on the point of order, please, Mr. McKinnon.
I will challenge the chair. It is entirely within my purview to urge the members to take whatever action I deem appropriate. It's not up to the chair to criticize me on that basis. But I certainly do encourage all members to realize that we have before us a decision on whether or not we meet tomorrow, and I think we need to adhere to that motion.
That's fine, Mr. McKinnon, but I don't think it's for you to decide on the relevance, as we've stated before, and many times in this committee and others, that we always allowed a rather wide latitude in discussions, especially in debate. But I understand your point. Please, if you could just wait for me to finish my commentary, Mr. McKinnon. But as I said, we always allow a very wide latitude on these issues. I was going to refer back to Mr. Lawrence, but go ahead again, Mr.
Point
McKinnon.
of order. Yes, I am not deciding what is relevant or not. I have expressed my opinion as a member, subbing into this committee that this discussion is not relevant. I'm entitled to make that observation, and I'll let it rest there.
Okay, then. Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And so the point that I'm making, and I do appreciate my Liberal colleagues listening intently to my commentary, but I will sort of, for their sake, sort of, I guess, distill this down into the relevance. So as I said, I believe it was 4 premiers that I've seen media reports on have written to the Finance Committee to ask to talk about the impending increase in the carbon tax. Thus, the urgency is April 1st when it goes up by 20%, 23%, I should say. We've heard testimony today from the Parliamentary Budget Officer that it increases the cost of food, that on average, a family in Ontario, Alberta, everywhere the backstop applies are out money. In some cases, thousands of dollars. Right from his report from the PBO, the fiscal and economic net loss in Alberta for the average household is $911. In Saskatchewan, it's $525. In Manitoba, it's $502. In my province, the beautiful province of Ontario, it's $627. It's in Nova Scotia, it's $537. In Prince Edward Island, it's $550. In Newfoundland, Labrador, it's $377. We're at an affordability crisis. People are barely getting by, and I guarantee you that every one of the MPs on here has gotten emails, letters, or calls from distressed constituents that are finding it difficult to get by. And
Mr. Chair, point of order. Just again, getting back to relevancy as tomorrow's meeting. I understand where Mr. Lawrence is coming from. He's not a regular member, so if it was so important for regular members of the Conservative Party to show up, they would have shown up. I believe it was Jack Layton who said, if you want a promotion, you got to show up to work. They didn't. I'm sorry. And Mr. Lawrence knows he's had tremendous respect for me. This meeting was called at the last minute. And I just want to inform the committee members of the consequences of, if we don't treat this motion today, the premiers will not be testifying tomorrow. There will be a motion to adjourn. You can feel the majority of the members are not on side with what happened. I'm just saying, out of respect for the witnesses that are supposed to show up, that nobody consented in this committee, this is what's going to happen tomorrow. So we ought to deal with this today out of respect. And then at some point, the committee, if they wish, they can pass a motion to have the premiers reappear at a point where all committee members are in favor. Merci.
Thanks, Mr. Jordan. Continue, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you. Thank you. And as I was saying, is the carbon tax is a substantial and pressing issue. And the reality is we're not living in a vacuum. The carbon tax isn't a policy that's being proposed for a year or 2 years or 5 years down the lane. The carbon tax is hurting people right now, and it's set to increase by fully 23%. The premiers of our great country, 4 of them, have asked to speak to parliamentarians. I am more than willing and more than able to schedule my time in order to be here. And it's completely within parliamentary rules to have any 4 conservatives that they want on this committee, Mr. Druin. So we regularly sub in and sub out individuals for various different reasons. And so that's not unusual at all. Certainly in Finance Committee, where I am a regular standing member, we've had numerous different members from the Liberal Party, from the NDP, and from the Conservative Party, as well as the Bloc Québécois. The reality is this is a time-sensitive, pressing concern. April 1st, the carbon tax is going to increase by fully 23%. We've heard from.
Point of order.
Excuse me, Mr. Lawrence.
No
Ms.
problem.
Atwin?
I would ask that this is quite repetitious. So if you could make a new point, perhaps, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mr. Lawrence?
Thank you, Ms. Atwin. And I do apologize. I probably did lose my train of thought through the numerous disruptions. But getting back to where I was, and so when we look at 2024, I went through the various net loss, the money coming out of Canadians' pockets when they can least afford it. In fact, GDP per capita since 2014 has not increased a dollar, not a penny, not a percent. In the United States, it's increased by nearly 50%. Canadians are getting poorer, and then this is a sucker punch.
Point of order.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, I fail to see the relevance of this to the question at hand. Also, I fail to see the relevance of having any premiers speak to us on estimates. It's a matter, it's totally out of their purview and totally out of the realm of legitimate action for the OGGO committee.
Okay. I find it funny you're talking calling relevance on the motion and then refer to something else, but I appreciate that. Mr. Lawrence, we'll go back to you.
Thank you very much. As I was saying, Canada is in
point of order.
Wow.
Go ahead, Mr. McKinnon.
2 words.
So my comments on relevance have to do with the current speaker's speech and how they're going on way off topic. And the question before us is whether we should have a meeting tomorrow. And the matter being brought forward is that these premiers are going to speak to us about things that are not on the docket for the OGGO committee itself. It has nothing to do with estimates.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Mr. Lawrence, go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. And so just to circle back once again to inform my colleagues on the other side, the primary subject of the meetings that are scheduled, that is the subject of the debate of this motion and the larger sort of argument or debate is the carbon tax. So I'm going to talk about the carbon tax. So they can continue to object to that, or they can just acknowledge the fact that a motion about carbon tax, you can talk about carbon tax. So when we look at
point of order,
Mr. McKinnon.
The member says he's going to talk about carbon tax. I remind the committee that the question before us is not about carbon tax. The question before us is whether or not we're going to have a meeting tomorrow.
On the same point of order, Mr. Chair.
Sure, go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. With respect to relevancy, I believe the meeting tomorrow will talk about the carbon tax. So I think Mr. Lawrence is well within his rights to discuss what would be discussed at the meeting and what committee members are voting on, whether we will have a meeting to discuss the items that Mr. Lawrence is discussing.
Sorry, 1 second, Mr. Chambers. Madame Vignola.
J'aimerais rappeler à Monsieur Chambers.
I'd like to remind Mr. Chambers that tomorrow's subject is the main estimates and not the carbon tax.
Continue, Mr. Chambers.
Thank you very much to my block colleague. I appreciate that reminder. But as I recall in the main estimates, the government's revenues and disbursements under the carbon tax rebate regime are included in the main estimates.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon and Mr. Chambers. I think we're understanding what you're getting at. I appreciate it, Mr. Lawrence. But again, as I mentioned, we always allow very wide latitude when it comes to debates, especially on motions. Continue, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to sort of close the loop on that, hopefully, is the main estimates talk about the revenue in and out of the carbon tax. And actually, there's a large gap between the amount of rebates being paid out and the amount of money collected in billions of dollars. And so I think because the government does claim that the carbon tax is revenue neutral, and that's not what the main estimates show, I think it's more than relevant. And in fact, if there were billions of dollars missing elsewhere, I think we would want the committee to spend significant time studying where that lost billions of dollars went. Just But getting back to, as I said, the issue of the carbon tax, Canadians, of course, are facing an unprecedented affordability crisis. In fact, Philip Cross, noted statistician and I believe economist as well, has stated that we have the worst economy since the Great Depression. We've experienced zero economic growth on a per capita basis since 2014. And so, and then we add on top of that the sucker punch of the carbon tax, and we put Canadians in a very difficult position. And on a go-forward basis, one of the reasons for the urgency of hearing from the premiers is that as of April 1st, the carbon tax is set to go up by 23%.
Point of order.
Ms. Atwin.
Repetition again. Literally, these same sentences have been reiterated several times now.
Thank you very much. We take your point. Mr. Lawrence.
I'll continue from that point. So as of April 1st, the carbon tax is set to go up by 23%. And the PBO did not just the fiscal and economic net loss in 2024, 2025 that I wrote off, but they also projected it going forward to 2030 to 2031. This is the train that we're trying to stop. And so in Alberta, the average household will lose $2,773.
Order, Mr. Chair. I hope the honourable member knows that the OGGO committee does not have the power, and I hope he reminds Albertans that the 13-cent Premier is going to increase the tax on Albertans. It's not a federal policy. It's an Alberta policy.
I will not recognize you again.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Mr. Drouin, please allow me to. I know it's just.
I just want to ask Mr. Lawrence how long does he have? How long does he have?
Allow me to recognize you first on your point of order, sir, just so we can maintain, especially with those who are virtual, it's very difficult to maintain any sense of decorum. Go ahead, Mr. Lawrence.
If you would indulge me, Mr. Chair, I actually didn't catch Mr. Drouin's question. I would honestly like to respond to it. If you would allow him to have the floor to answer the question, if that would be cool.
Yeah, just being cognizant of everybody's time, I'm just wondering if Mr. Lawrence is going to talk for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and just remind him again, we may not deal with this issue today, but we will deal with it tomorrow, and that will, just because you can sense the majority of the committee members where they're at. So I'm just saying, regardless of what you do, this will be the impact tomorrow.
And before we continue, thanks, Mr. Drouin, and I realize that normally we do allow a lot more just back and forth, but just because it's split between in-person and virtual, it's just a bit more difficult. We'll just ask everyone, happy to recognize for a point of order, but let me recognize you for the floor first before you continue, so that whoever is speaking at the time can be interrupted properly and can hear your point of order. Thanks very much.
And so as I was saying, from 2030 to 2031, the PBO predicts the following will be the net financial impact. And keep in mind, this is a carbon tax that the government has said numerous times that it's revenue neutral, that Canadians get back more what they earn, and the PBO has exposed that as what it is. And I'm just going to say it, it's a lie. And so the
point of order.
Go ahead, Mr. McKinnon.
Firstly, Mr. Chair, I appreciate your problem in trying to keep all the ducks in a row. Being a sometime chair myself, I recognize that and I acknowledge your issues. But I take great exception to the member speaking of this policy as a lie that is completely unparliamentary and out of line.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. I just urge everyone from all four sides of our table or our round of our circle here to be cognizant of their comments. Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you. I just when the government is telling us that when they are saying that Canadians are getting more in rebate than they're receiving, than they're paying, and it's untrue. And the Parliamentary Committee and the Parliamentary Budget Officer has confirmed this to us, and I have the numbers right in front of me, and I'm happy to show them. So my advice, candidly, to him and to his party would be to stop allowing falsehoods to go out from the Liberal Party that state that the carbon tax is revenue neutral. It's not true. That's in the main estimates. B, that Canadians are not worse off for the carbon tax. We heard testimony multiple times from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. And C, that they say that it's not inflationary. When we heard from the Government Bank of Canada, fully a third of inflation, and we actually saw what happened in Saskatchewan, where we saw inflation drop precipitously with the non-collection of the on-home heating. So these three things are facts, they're undisputable. And so if you say otherwise, I'm sorry, that's a falsehood. That's not true. I was sent here by the members of Northumberland, Peterborough to speak the truth, and that's what I'm going to do. And so when we look at the net fiscal and economic impact in 2030, in Saskatchewan, it's $1,723 per household. In Manitoba, it's $1,490. In Ontario, it's $1,820. In Nova Scotia, it's $1,513. In Prince Edward Island, it's $1,521. In Newfoundland and Labrador, it's $1,317, or $16, my apologies there. So we can see that this is a real and pressing issue. And just to get people sort of fully understanding.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Kuzmichuk, but just when we're done with the point of order, I'm going to suspend for a few moments so that our resources here can have a very quick break. Go ahead, Mr. Kuzmichuk.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, and again, point of order, again, repetition. And Mr. Chair, I've said this before, you have an opportunity to rebuild your trust and your relationship with this committee. The longer that you allow this circus to continue, this farce to continue, the more damage you do to the relationship between yourself and the members of this committee. And I want you to consider that. And I ask you to please, again, put an end to this circus and to this farce, and let's get this committee back on track.
Thanks. I hear what you're saying, Mr. Kuzmichuk. I disagree with your choice of wording, but I hear you loud and clear. I will return to our colleague, Mr. Lawrence, with that in mind, but we will suspend for about 3 or 4 minutes just so all the support staff and others can have a quick refresh. So we'll suspend for 4 minutes.
Hi everybody, anyone new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Don't forget to share the content with your friends, and if you feel super generous, you can help support the channel with a super chat or sticker. We also have memberships available for anyone that is interested in becoming a member to the channel. It's funny because this committee has gone well past its time. It was supposed to be done at 1 o'clock. But all these motions are going to screw up the committee meeting for tomorrow if they don't sit here and filibuster until they run out of resources. I think if the premiers want to stand behind Canadians, then on April 1st, during the protest in Ottawa, the premier should be there protesting with Canadians. Anyone just joining the channel, please smash that like button. It really helps to fight the algorithm so that the channel gets more views. Well, this has got to be the longest 3 minutes I've ever seen. Anyone new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Anyone that would like to do so can become a member or can purchase a super chat or sticker to help support the channel.
Mr. Lawrence, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our interpreters and to the clerk and to the team here and to the analysts there. We appreciate your work there. In Finance Committee, we have a rule where the analysts actually have to put their name tags out there, and because I don't believe you. In this case, gentlemen, but ladies and gentlemen, get the recognition you deserve there. So. But I was just talking about the fiscal and economic net impact to Canadians in 2030 and 2031. And just at the risk of being point of order again, and just because we did take a suspension, I would like to just briefly reiterate why we think it's important that we have this hearing tomorrow, and the urgency. The carbon tax is set to go up on April 1st, and of course we've got the Easter break coming into place shortly. We're coming up on Easter weekend, and to all my Christian friends out there, happy Easter. This is really the last opportunity we'll have to hear the premiers before the increase on April 1st of 23% in the carbon tax. So it's really now or never to hear from the premiers, and if they are willing to take time out of their extremely busy schedules, I believe that. We should be able to organize a committee to hear them, and I believe that the notice of motion or notice of meeting has already gone out. I'm quite sure that out of the 160 odd Liberals we have in the House, that they could arrange 4 or 5 to appear tomorrow to hear this very important testimony. And what I think sometimes gets lost, because when we're in these rooms, we only see we see the parliamentarians, of course, our great analysts, our interpreters, and clerk, and our chair, and maybe a few folks from the media. But we're all here to represent hundreds of thousands, millions of Canadians. And I think more than the questioning of any particular right of privilege of an MP to ask various individual questions, I think it's clear that this is a subject that Canadians want to talk about. We have over 70% of Canadians who are against the carbon tax, and if we've got multiple premiers lined up who want to listen to us, I think we can certainly we can organize just to have one meeting to listen to them and get 10 or so members of Parliament to listen to them. And so because of the potential impact of the carbon tax. And so let me just put some context actually with respect to why this is so important. Is that the carbon tax is in many ways a tipping point I see for the Canadian economy, because if all other lights were go for the economy, it might be a different matter. But we have warnings from across the political spectrum, from economists of all stripes, telling us that this economy is in severe peril. Whether it be the lack of capital investment, the OECD predicts that we'll be near the bottom. I think at the very bottom, actually, over the next 40 years with respect to capital investment, and capital investment along with innovation and our workers underpin the foundation of productivity. Productivity is, of course, measured as GDP per hour. Canada has been a laggard in this category, and has really sort of drifted downwards in the last 10 years. And in order to increase GDP per capita, I heard actually an economist on one of the political shows yesterday citing 2 things we need to get done to increase that productivity. One is we need a reduction in taxation. It's squarely on the carbon tax. And the second thing is we need to attract foreign investment by making it easier for our projects to happen, to make it the ease of business for both big and small business to perform their wonderful work. And so the carbon tax hits both of these things, because the carbon tax creates additional costs and uncertainty into the Canadian economy, while at the same time it's an additional level of taxation. The reality is that the driver of any nation's economy, any capitalist country, is the private sector, and it's as the great Brian Mulroney showed, when you privatize 22 separate institutions, it's a great driver of economic growth going forward. And so what this government has done is it's increasingly taken the oxygen out of the room for the private sector. And as you divert more assets, and spending is way up since actually pre-pandemic, well over 20% more we're spending as a government. What that means is that there are resources being diverted from the private sector, the sector that's really responsible for moving our economy forward, and the engine that drives our economy. You begin to suffocate it, and you've seen that impact with respect to our productivity numbers. They haven't increased once again since 2014. And I really see the carbon tax as sand in the gears of the Canadian economy. It's slowing everything down. And then folks will talk about, well, we need the carbon tax to reduce emissions, and that just ain't so, as I would say, because currently we're near the bottom. I think we're 62 out of 67 with respect to emissions reductions. We're not on track to meet any of our emissions targets. We've blown by targets. The only time we were, quote unquote, on track was when our economy was shut down during the pandemic. Of course, the Minister of Environment will cite that without any context. But and besides that, we've never been on track to hit those targets. So we're 62 out of 67, and sort of the bigger story of why that happens is actually, so the goal should not be to just reduce Canadian emissions. It should be to reduce global emissions, because CO2 or carbon dioxide, other greenhouse gases, really they don't know any borders. They don't know any boundaries. And so if Beijing pumps out an additional amount of carbon, it's not like it just stays over the PRC. And so the reality of it is so what we're doing when we impose the carbon tax is we're pushing Canadian industry out of Canada. So clean, sustainable Canadian energy. In my great province of Ontario, that means a lot of nuclear and hydro and carbon-free power, and we're pushing that industry out of this relatively, in fact, clean Canadian energy. And we are pushing it towards other jurisdictions that don't have carbon pricing but have far less clean energy sources. And so the reality is that by putting these punitive costs on our Canadian farmers, on our Canadian business owners, what we're doing is we're funding other authoritarian regimes around the world, while at the same time costing ourselves. And actually, it in many cases has a net negative impact, not just to the Canadian consumer, but also to emissions going on. Because you can just picture it. If you are a factory operating in Northumberland, Peterborough South, you're going to have a lot of your power created by Darlington, a great nuclear facility. And if in fact you can't make it there, and you say, well, it's less expensive to go to West Virginia or Guangdong province or someplace where there is not a carbon tax, or even Mexico. Mexico is a very small carbon tax, but very, very small. What happens is now you are, instead of having nuclear energy power this manufacturing, powering the economy, what...
Point of order.
Yes, Ms. Atwin.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm really trying to give my colleague the latitude that he seeks in this moment, but I'm hearing same tables being shared. I'm hearing the same sentences being shared. Now we're talking about other nations. This is not relevant at all.
Thank you, Ms. Atwin. Mr. Lawrence, we always allow wide latitude if we could
Yeah,
bring it home.
the challenge with that is in the same point of order, I heard the fact that I was repetitious and I was also adding too much new material, and so like the reality is that the Prime Minister continues to lie about the effectiveness and about the treatment of the carbon tax, right? So
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. McKenna.
Once again, the member has accused the Prime Minister of lying. It is completely unparliamentary, and I would ask him to apologize.
I have another unsolicited point of order asked for a resignation as well. But Mr. Lawrence,
I mean, the truth is the truth, and the reality is the Prime Minister is lying.
Point of order. It is completely unparliamentary.
On that point of order?
It is totally against the rules. What is
we have
not allowed
another
in the
point of
House
order,
is
Mr.
also not
McKenna.
allowed in committee.
Sorry, we have another point of order.
The point of order is he's suggesting that it's non-parliamentary, but with all due respect, the Prime Minister is continuing to say that Canadians are better off because of the carbon tax. It's an outright lie, period.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we were at Mr. McKinnon.
Once again, I believe that's a violation of the standing orders and the general practice of the House to accuse a member of lying. And I would ask both members now to apologize.
I would cite the following letter as evidence of a lie, and so.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I just
point of order
on parliamentary.
Hold on. Sorry, Mr. Doohan. Before I go back to you, was that Mr. Doohan or Mr. Kazmierczak?
Chair, you can't point of order a point of order.
Okay, Mr. Doohan, go ahead.
Just
point of order.
Okay. I would just caution
Mr.
members
Doohan,
in terms of using language. I could say Pierre Poilievre is a liar because he's misquoting the Bank of Canada. The carbon pricing represents 1/20th of the impact on inflation. So that's for the record. The Bank of Canada has stated that clearly, but I wouldn't say that, and I will retract my comments
Point of
because
order.
I'm an honorable member.
Or Ms. Goodridge?
Thank you.
Sorry.
I'm very new tuning in. However, I've been listening from my apartment here for a while, actually my office. And this is absolutely crazy. And we are fighting over something that the Parliamentary Budget Officer has been very clear. Canadians are worse off because of the carbon tax. There's been absolute disingenuous information coming from the Liberals throughout this entire meeting.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. Because of all this is ridiculous. This is disorder. I am adjourning. Enough.
That is freaking hilarious. Okay. Anyone new to the channel, please like and subscribe. You can help the channel out by purchasing a super chat or sticker, or becoming a member even. Thank you, Pink Emo Slayer, for your contribution. I hope you guys have a wonderful day.